Okay.
That's really you.
Okay, so we have recording in progress.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to open the meeting and have a roll call for attendance.
Sure. Director Bragman,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Here.
and Vice President Russell.
Here. And I'd like to have a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Vice President Russell.
Aye. And do we have any public comment about the closed session agenda?
We do not on the closed session agenda items.
Okay. Well, then we need to let this one ride and move on to the next sign in, guys. Closed session was held before the regular board meeting and the conclusion was no reportable action. Okay, with that, can I call for public comment on any item not on the agenda?
I see a couple of hands raised. The first one is Steve Isaacs, then Baron Hamill in that order, please. Go ahead, Mr. Isaacs.
Good evening, everybody. I'm a resident of Greenbrae, so Mr. Bragman, you're my director. I'd love to meet you sometime. I have a two-part question. First, you're committed to conservation and importing water. Why not at the same time develop feasibility studies and budget plans for a permanent desal plant? Secondly, what commitments have you received to get water from outside sources? Thank you. I look forward to your answers.
Thank you very much. Next.
Oh, okay. Ms. Hamill.
Good evening. One statement in particular from Directors Kohler and Schmidt's piece in the August 29th Marin IJ got my attention. Quote, "Our priority must be the projects and actions that most effectively safeguard supply," end quote. With that said, I'd like to take this opportunity to correct my past statements about the 3 golf courses' water usage. It's been brought to my attention that my figure was incorrect. I said that the 3 courses combined are using 38.5 million gallons of potable and raw water to irrigate greens and tees. I now have it on good authority that the Meadowwood Golf Course alone uses 58 million gallons of water a year. Using rough math, multiply that by 3 courses, and the number is closer to 150 million gallons or 535 acre-feet of water to irrigate grass. Marin Water is about to spend many millions of ratepayer and taxpayer dollars, as well as borrowed money to build a pipeline to deliver water to customers for personal use only. None of this costly water will be allowed for garden irrigation. Will the golf courses be included in that list of customers? And if so, what's considered their personal use of water? Greens and tees again? Surely not. My household has more than a 50% savings compared to last year, yet daily I fret over the unexpected expenditure of a mere half gallon. Please help me understand why I should worry about this small amount of water when vast quantities of it are being used so cavalierly for the leisurely pursuit of a small group of people. No wonder Marin Water is having trouble motivating the public to conserve 40%. Just look at the optics of the golf course scenario. If you want the public to conserve more water, then you must demonstrate that you're serious and not just paying lip service to it with a wink, wink, nod, nod approach to some users, because that's the takeaway the public has, whether you realize it or not. Numbers don't lie. So if Marin Water's board of directors truly believes, quote, "Our priority must be the projects and actions that most effectively safeguard supply," end quote. Effectively safeguarding supply being the operative words, then I beseech you to walk the talk and immediately take action to stop this abuse. That action will be a step towards effectively safeguarding our limited and rapidly dwindling water supply and will send a real message. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you.
The next
Any more?
two, yeah, there are
Yeah.
three more. The next two, though, David Rydell, then Peter Anderson, please, in that order.
This is David Riedel. I'm a resident of
Riedel.
Greenbrae.
Go ahead, sir.
This is David Riedel. I'm a resident of Greenbrae. I request that you agendize for public discussion the prospect of upgrading your recycled water program for residential users. The city of Healdsburg and Sonoma provides a great example of one possible approach. Recent press reports highlight that the city has a recycled water delivery program, delivering up to 500 gallons of recycled water to homes. Residences are required to have an approved tank with or container to store and at an appropriate location. More than 25% of households in Healdsburg have signed up for this water usage, for this water program, and water usage is down 48% from the comparable period last year. The city is running this program, absorbing the cost, but I would imagine plenty people would pay for this kind of service. I would like you to agendize a discussion to consider instituting a similar project in Marin. If you're not in a position to do this, I suggest you revisit the parameters of your own recycled water program for residential users, allowing for the resale of that water so that the private sector can take this on. I think this would be a positive, proactive step that you can take with minimal capital expenditures that could have a significant impact on water usage. I request that the minutes for this meeting reflect my request to agendize a public discussion of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Peter-
could I ask a question? On our last agenda, you guys were looking into private delivery or contracting out to do what Mr. Rydell suggested. Is there any update on that?
Paul, do you have any update on that, where we are?
Yeah, thank you, Paul Celia, Operations Director. Thanks for the question, Director Bragman. We did look into it and we contacted a couple of delivery companies, construction companies in particular, because they're the ones that tend to have the water trucks that can take this water around. And what we found was two things. One, they weren't willing to take it on directly with residents because it would be too difficult for them to manage the multiple sort of account holders, if you like. And then we asked them, would they be willing to engage with the district? So the district would handle the sort of residential accounting and they would just have an agreement with us. And they've turned us down. So we're still trying to find a private company that will help us. So it's a bit of a work in progress.
Did you talk to Gelati?
That was who we talked to, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because they'll almost do anything. So,
Right.
and in a good way. I didn't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah. Is it worth looking into leasing a couple trucks?
I think that's the next step for us is to look around and see if we can find a couple of trucks to lease.
You know, I mean, yeah, Healdsburg is doing pretty well with it. So,
Yeah, I would just note, Healdsburg's a square mile.
yeah, no, I know. It'd be a bigger deal for us, but
Yeah. We thought maybe we could have tankers that we could go park one maybe in Blackie's pasture and so it wouldn't be as much of a trip for folks. But we're still working on it.
okay. Well, let's continue our due diligence because it's an interesting proposition. So,
Yeah, and I just one last note, there is Paul Burrows, who was quoted in the IJ as having a truck that he uses for his pressure washing business. But he is on our website and he is willing to set up for deliveries for folks.
okay.
We have one
Okay.
started.
Okay.
Harry,
Yes, Peter Anderson, then James Krajewski, please, in that order.
Yeah, here.
Go ahead, sir. Mr. Anderson?
I'm looking for the right button.
you got it. You're loud and clear.
Am I okay?
Yes.
This is old business and it's really a question for Ben. This goes back to a letter from Mary Casey, General Counsel, dated May 11th, 2017. So that was before you were here, Ben. Regarding your request for the amount of time spent patrolling for wildland fire danger and code enforcement watershed staff does not capture that data. To me, that data is vital. My question to you, Ben, is that data being captured today?
We can't answer. I'm sorry if it's not agendized, but we will get an answer for you.
Okay, and I have a statement about hiring another ranger for
Sure.
the fighting staff. Should I do that now or later?
You can do it now.
Okay. Board policy number 7, item 42, 4.2 says the district will maintain staff, equipment, and prepare and keep current protocols to ensure its ability to respond quickly and suppress fire on the watershed. That's pretty clear. In 1995, there were 12 MMWD rangers, all qualified to fight fires and to respond to medical emergencies. That was 26 years ago, before tens of thousands of trees were killed by the sudden SOD and before the watershed was overwhelmed by an influx of mountain bikers and hikers looking for respite from the COVID epidemic. 26 years ago, we had 12 rangers. Today, there are 6 rangers, not 12. How can this be justified knowing the mountain is at extreme risk for fire and it is being overwhelmed with visitors, perhaps as many as 3 million or more a year? So what do we want? Step 1 is to acknowledge that we have made a mistake by allowing the reduction in ranger staff and firefighting equipment. Step 2 is to begin to restore the ranger staff to the original 1995 level. That's the end of my statement. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.
I have a
Mr.
question.
Krajewski?
Question?
Huh.
Don't we have an item on tonight's agenda to add a ranger position?
Yes, Director Bragman. I think the comment was likely in support of that.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I'm sorry. I probably should have realized that sooner when he said it.
Is that an additional ranger?
Yes, that would bring the number to 7 from 6.
Just for clarification of the record. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Krajewski?
Hi, thank you. Despite a serious drought that's now been going on for several months, the district still does not have on its website an easy to find or readily accessible accounting of where our water is being consumed. For example, how much is used for individual households or businesses or landscaping or pools or firefighting or golf courses or new housing, etc. If the district wants consumers to buy into cutbacks, I would think a high priority would be giving to making consumers aware of how what are the current uses of our water. For example, I would guess that very few people had any concept of the significant percentage of our water supply that's being released for environmental purposes unless they read a recent article in the IJ. This kind of information should be readily available in a summary of water use on the web page. Why does the district make it so difficult to find specifics about where our water is going? I sent an email into the district and got some information back, and one of them was a 371-page document that has buried in it some very interesting data. But why is that data not put on, separated out of that document and put on a simple 1 or 2 pages of the web? So I don't know, I don't think the district's trying to hide anything, but are you too overwhelmed or too busy? Do they not think that this is of interest to the consumers? I have no idea. It shouldn't take much time or effort to set up a summary section on the website that puts in information that's otherwise buried in these reports on elsewhere in the Marin Water website. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No more speakers, sir.
Okay, great. Do we have any directors and general managers announcements?
I want to make a little announcement, okay? It's
Okay.
very brief. But on Thursday, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, State of California, is going to have a hearing on putting warning labels on glyphosate. So you can register to make a comment. There's speaker cards online, and I'll be there at that meeting to make a comment. So, you know, just to underline our district's good decision to avoid the use of glyphosate. You know, we have the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments now conjuring up a label to put on the stuff. So anyway, just an informational item.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Monty, Ben? Nope. Okay, I need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I would make the motion with, I'm gonna vote no on item 6. And I have a question about item 8.
We can vote
Okay.
separately on item 6.
That's fine. And my question about item 8, Ben, is just on this contracting out. This is just a short-term arrangement, isn't it?
Yes, this item is to give us some resource support given the drought and the tremendous resource demand, staff demand that's taking. And this is backfilling that for a few months we're looking at. And the reason I'm fairly confident in the time frame is the key activity this is backfilling is our water waste program. And once we get out of summer irrigation season, the value of having the sort of effort we have now that requires that coordination probably will be on pause through the wet season. Of course, we're all hoping that it's somewhat wet. And then we would pick it up in the springtime, probably in some sort of different approach.
Right, but it's not it doesn't mark a change in policy about substituting out contractors.
It does not. We have not had a history of looking at contracting out as a desired way to go. And that's in no way what this reflects.
Yeah, okay, just wanted to verify. Thanks a lot.
So with that said, we'll be looking not to renew this agreement, Ben.
That's correct.
Okay, down the road, so.
So with the exception of item 6, I would move approval.
Okay, so Molly, you volunteered a solution to the situation, so how do we?
I would suggest if the board is amenable that we move item 6 to a meeting where we have a greater number of board members available to vote on the item. Otherwise, if one board member today votes no, it will not pass.
It won't pass, right?
So if it's something that we're interested in moving, we can put it on the next meeting consent calendar.
Is that okay with you, Larry?
That's fine. That's fine. That's
Okay.
a good idea.
Okay, so let's remove 6 from the consent calendar.
Okay.
And with that, can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Vice President Russell.
Aye. Okay, water use penalties.
Good evening, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Sufficiency Manager, and I have this item. Let me pull up my presentation here. So I'm going to be joined with Mark Hildebrand of Hildebrand Consulting. He is a rate consultant who assisted us in this process. So jumping right in, starting with an overview, we're going to review the district's current waterways prohibitions and their associated penalties. And then we have some proposed prohibitions and penalties that staff has developed for your consideration and of course to get your input, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. So looking at our current waterways prohibitions, we have a number of waterways prohibitions in place, some that have been in place for many years and others that are part of our drought response. The list here is focused on landscaping, and I'll just call out a couple of these. One is our most recent landscape restriction around overhead spray irrigation, limiting it to 1 day a week. Another would be something we've had in place for many years, which is not allowing runoff or overspray. The details of all of these prohibitions are on our website at marinwater.org/water rules. Beyond landscaping, we also have some other existing waterways prohibitions that are really sector specific. Looking at hotels and lodging, and also pools and spas. So we recently enacted a pool cover requirement for outdoor swimming pools as part of our drought response. And finally, there's some additional prohibitions that just don't really fall into any of those other prior categories, such as pressure washing sidewalks or washing sidewalks, walkways, etc., pressure washing of homes, and also the use of potable water for things like dust control, where tertiary treated recycled water would is a viable alternative. In addition, we have leaks as a waterways prohibition, where leaks have to be repaired within 48 hours of either discovery or notification. So all of these waterways prohibitions have penalties associated with them. The penalties start with a notification. They follow up with a second notice, which is a small fine, and then any subsequent violation has a larger fine. The leaks do have a separate penalty charge process or structure, if you would. Residential customers are charged $150 for not fixing that leak within this specified time frame, and they can be charged every 60 days until that leak is repaired. Our commercial customers have a 20% of their prior year's water bill as their fine. In both of these situations, there's escalating enforcement, and the goal there is to really have us give staff an opportunity to address repeat offenders. In addition to the penalties, of course, we have variances. We recognize that the intent of the prohibitions is very specific, but there may be justification for that prohibited use to be allowed. And the code does call out the 3 specific justifications that can be used to pursue a variance. And any prohibition that we currently have on the books, and then any new prohibition, would also allow for this variance process. So now moving on to the proposed additional prohibitions and their associated penalties. So before we go into the discussion on the specific prohibition, I want to provide a little bit of background. So looking at our single family residential customers, which of course is our largest, the majority of our customers are single family residential. We looked at the tiered allotments. And so on the left here, you can see each tier 1 through 4, their summer tier breakdown, and then the winter breakdown, right? So then what we did is we said, okay, well, with a family of 4, so we assume 4 people per household, what is tier 1? What does that equate to for tier 1? So for the summer months, tier 1 tops out at 81 gallons per person per day for a family of 4. And you can see how the tiers escalate or increase. For the winter months, it starts at 65 as the top of tier 1, right? Again, assuming 4 people per household. In addition, we wanted to include in this presentation what the district developed around residential indoor water use. So we had this guidance that has been presented to the board. It's on our website. It's out there, and its intended use is to help our customers understand how low could they go for their indoor use, right? So what's an acceptable range, if you would. Looking at the most efficient households would be down in the 35 gallons per capita per day range. That's a great goal to hit. We do have customers that are down in that range, so it's not that far-fetched. But then also looking at something like a 55 gallons per person per day range, which would also be an acceptable level of water use. The 55 gallons per day standard is established by the state, and it is it's established by the state, and it is part of the Making Conservation a California Way of Life legislation. So once the state starts enacting this legislation, we'll actually be allotted 55 gallons per person per day as our district-wide water budget. So it seems like it makes sense to include that range as well in this scale. And if we look at the winter GPCD, which would be essentially only indoor use, it tops out at 65. So if a household can get to that 55 gallons per day range, they would be remaining in tier 1 throughout those winter months. We also wanted to look at how many of our single family residential customers fall within these tiers, both in summer and winter. And so during the summer months, we have about 32.5%, 32% of our customers are in tier 2, and then about 8.5%, almost 9% are in tiers 3 and 4. In the winter, it drops down significantly, right? Down to 10% in tier 2 and less than 2% in tiers 3 and 4. If you look at the usage as well, summer use, of course, is higher, right? There's a lot of irrigation that's potentially occurring or is absolutely occurring during that time frame. And then the winter use also declines down to about just under 10% for tiers 2, 3, and 4. We did the same analysis for our dedicated irrigation customers. We looked at how many of those customers were falling within each specific tier. It was interesting to find that during the summer and winter months, the tier by occurrence is actually fairly similar, but yet the usage by tier is drastically different. And it really actually seems to make sense once we start digging into the rate structure. So the way our dedicated irrigation customers are billed, their rate structure, it allows for them to have maximum flexibility to allocate more of their total allotment during those summer months, so that it really just allows the site to have maximum flexibility, right? So their total allotment is set when they become a customer, but they can divvy up that allotment throughout the year. And through active management of the site's water use, they can actually avoid going into those higher tiers. And we see that this clearly demonstrates that that's exactly what customers are doing when they're managing these dedicated irrigation accounts to avoid going into those higher tiers. So at this point, I'm going to bring in Mark Hildebrand of Hildebrand Consulting, and he's going to cover the next few slides.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for having me this evening. So what I'd like to speak to you about this evening are the use of water use penalties. And as we engage in this discussion, I just want to be very clear that the fees that we'll be discussing in the following presentation aren't actually fees, and they're not rates, they are penalties. So they'll be based on a prohibition policy that the district would choose to adopt, and it would prohibit certain types of water use. The law pertaining to penalties is very different than the law that pertains to rates. Proposition 218 is the applicable law in the case of penalties, and it is within the district's authority to be able to charge penalties for behaviors that is counter to what the district is trying to achieve in providing service to their customers. Whereas Proposition 218 applies to rates, where you have to demonstrate that the rates are proportionate to the cost of providing service. So just to be very clear, these are penalties and they have nothing to do with the cost of providing service. Next slide. So there are, it's a two-pronged policy that we are proposing here this evening. And the first thing that's going to jump out on the slide is the $5 that you see over on the right side. And I want to be immediately clear that we are not proposing a specific amount right up front. That's a placeholder number that's open for the board to discuss and to make a decision on what they think is an appropriate amount of a penalty. But in this case, what we are proposing here is that there be a winter restriction so that the district would prohibit all irrigation water use during the winter months. And that would be December through April. And through March. Sorry, Gary, is it through April or is it through May? I believe it's through May.
December through May.
Thank you. December through May. And in the case of single family residential, the graph on the right represents the tiers paid by single family residential. And the idea behind the tiers is that tier 1 is based on the numbers that Carrie presented earlier, is really adequate, largely adequate to meet all of the customers' indoor water needs. And so tiers 2, 3, and 4 are considered water use that's beyond the need for indoor water use, and really therefore used for irrigation. And so for this particular restriction, the district would be prohibiting all water use above tier 1. And so you can see there would be a $5 penalty for any water use above tier 1. Again, when we say there's a prohibition, again, I do not want to be misheard or misquoted. We're not turning anybody's water off. This is simply penalizing folks for using water above a certain level. And so you can see here in the presentation, it would be tiers 2, 3, and 4 that would be penalized for single family residential. And it would be tiers 1, 2, and 3 for irrigation accounts. So irrigation accounts would be penalized for all water use. It's important to note that commercial and multifamily customers would not be subject to the restriction on the face of it. However, keep in mind that many commercial accounts have a separate meter for irrigation, and many, if not most, multifamily also have a separate meter for irrigation. So they will indirectly be subject to the same restrictions, just not on their indoor meter, which is not used for irrigation. So that would be the winter restriction. Next slide. During the summer, so that would be June through November, the restriction would be to prohibit excessive irrigation water use. So in the case for single family homes, it would be all water use above tier 2. So tier 3 and tier 4 would be penalized. For irrigation accounts, it would be tiers 2 and 3. And again, commercial and multifamily customers would not be subject to restrictions. Next slide. So one of the first questions that would be asked is, how is this going to impact our customers? And I apologize for all the numbers on this graph. Believe me when I tell you that we try to really simplify what we show you here, but in order to give a complete picture, we really need to show quite a few numbers. So let's take the table in the upper left-hand corner. So this would be during the summer with a $5 penalty, with the prohibition being on excess irrigation. If a customer were to use all of their tier 3 allocation, so they'd use tier 1, tier 2, and all of the allocation they have for tier 3, their normal bill would be $510. Their penalty would be $100. The total would be $610, and the increase to their bill would be a 20% increase. If that same customer were to go into tier 4, and the assumption for this particular bill impact analysis is that the amount of water that they're using in tier 4 would be half of all the water that they used up until through tier 3. So say they used 100 units through tier 3, then they would use another 50 for a total of 150. Their normal bill would be $1,037, and their increase to their bill would be about 22%. So I'm not going to walk through each one of these tables because I just wanted to give you a sense of what these numbers mean. You can see that there's the summer restrictions on the left, bill impacts for winter restrictions on the right, and we have a $5 scenario up top and a $20 scenario on the bottom of the slide. Same type of slide on the irrigation side. So we have the $5 penalties on the top and $20 on the bottom. In this case, we're assuming that this particular account is a moderately sized irrigation account with a 2-inch meter and using about 75 units during the summer and about 10 units during the winter. As Carrie explained earlier, the baseline, so in other words, the quote unquote budget of water that these accounts have has been tailored by month based on what their needs are throughout the year. So an account that significantly cut back during the winter and only used 10 CCF could still be penalized because that would be above their baseline, which would be below 10. during previous conversations, the question was posed what the district's counterparts are doing throughout the state. Penalties are certainly not ubiquitous. And so this is I don't want to say comprehensive list, but I think it captures the majority of the utilities that are out there that are currently using penalties to help manage as one of their water management strategies. And you can see that the range of penalties is quite large, as low as $1.25 per unit in some cases, and up to $250. The rules associated with each one of these are relatively complex, so I didn't really have room on the slide to give a comprehensive description of how the rules played out, but you can see that the allocation-based and progressive would be the closest fit to what's being proposed here with Marin Water. Next slide. Carrie?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So I have the recommendation slide. And so what we're proposing here is twofold. One is in the near term for the board to consider adoption of these winter and summer water use restrictions, recognizing that it will address the need to discourage excess water use, right? As we close out summer and we start walking into winter, recognizing the drought conditions we're in. Implementation of timing, we proposed that the ordinance would be brought before the board for adoption on September 21st. And the effective date would be December 1st, recognizing that our 60-day bi-monthly billing period, we would need that time to notice customers, and December 1st would be the effective date. Looking at the longer term, we've continued to plan for drought rates to address district revenue needs, as Mark noted. We would also consider water budget based rates as part of this process. The implementation timing is a range of 4 to 12 months. We recognize that's quite long. Part of that is the Prop 218 process, but the other part is that, if we are going to move towards water budget based rates, it will take 12 months or so to get that pulled together. There are other drought rates that could be pursued that could be done in a shorter time frame. So I think I would pause here to get some board input, if that's appropriate, Ben.
Sure. Larry, Monty?
I'll go. I think it's overdue. And it's a little disappointing we have to wait till December 1st because we will be out of summer rates at that point. So that's a little disappointing. I think I like the idea of a progressive penalty, maybe 5, 10, 15 versus, a flat rate for each tier. I think the higher tiers should pay more because they're really kind of more flagrantly using too much water. So that's kind of my hit on it. And I guess because of the billing cycle, we can't implement this any sooner than December 1st. Is that where it's at? So.
Yeah, Director Bregman, that's correct. And that's due, as Carrie noted, primarily because of the 2-month billing cycle and the need to notice everyone. And right, so if it were implemented tomorrow, we'd have to wait 2 months from tomorrow, essentially, to know how much of a given bill was pre or post the action, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then as far as winter penalty rates, could you kind of just do a little summary of that? I'm not sure if I really captured that.
Sure. So the winter summary, the winter restrictions would be prohibiting all water use beyond tier 1. So tiers 2, 3, and 4 for single family accounts would be charged a penalty.
I see. Okay.
And then all irrigation accounts.
Okay. Are golf courses irrigation accounts?
Yes.
And
yes.
So they would not be subject to this unless we supplemented or augmented our water use restrictions.
So the
No,
golf,
They
go ahead.
would be, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, the golf courses have received a variance. So I think that we would need to look at that variance process and see if, if that needs to be revisited or their variance needs to be revisited. And I think that might be a question for Molly more so than me, if we have that opportunity.
Yeah, I would like to get that added as an agenda item because this drought is, I think we've got to have all hands on deck and all options on the table. And so I'd like to review the variance to see if we could go with the original plan, which was greens only. The Meadow Club is very brown. I mean, the fairways are dead and dying, or at least very brown. They look like they've expanded the greens. So it's like the greens are very green and the chipping area, they've made very green areas where you chip onto the green. But,
I think, Director Bragman, I think we could look at that, and if as Carrie says, they're irrigation customers or irrigation accounts, and we could look at which of the prohibitions or restrictions that are in place would be most restrictive and be clear about where the compliance lies. And that may mean that the variance, if they might need to seek a modification, or they would need to comply with a new prohibition that came into place as a later addition to our ordinance. So, but it's possible that, and I don't know, Carrie may be able to speak to this, that they would be within the cap that we're putting on them. Maybe they're already meeting that within that cap. And if so, then they wouldn't have to worry about bumping into the penalty. But we would definitely need to look at that closely.
yeah, and I think we should look into going back to the original proposal, which was water the greens. The greens, take a lot of work to maintain, so we don't want them to lose that asset. But we're when I look at how are we going to get to 40%, we're restricting habitat releases. I mean, it just, you can't square one with the other, in my opinion. So I would definitely like to take a look at that and get that done in time to make the change by December 1st, if we're going to do it. And same with filling new pools. I don't know if anybody's delivering potable water in Marin. That's one question I have. I don't know if that's, I just don't have the knowledge whether there are water delivery services up here. But that's what I would suggest. That's what Healdsburg says. You want to fill your pool, fill a new pool, bring the water in, you pay for it. A pool is a very expensive project. It's usually a 6-figure project. To fill the pool, it's not unreasonable to ask folks to bring in their own water to get the pool filled. So that would be another one I'd like to have us look into so that we could implement it by December 1st. So those are my comments. And then to stagger the tiers, I think would probably be a good idea.
To clarify, Director Bragman, one of our golf courses is raw water. So,
yeah, and one of them is recycled water, which, as far as the calculation that the commenter made, you can't just multiply. And then, Meadow Club is 18 holes. The other 2 are 9 holes. One of those is recycled water. So, you can't paint a broad brush on all these courses.
Take myself off mute. I won't reiterate. Director Bragman, I think, captured a lot of really great points that I agree with entirely. There's not a thing that you mentioned that I wouldn't also support and would like to also see it shouldn't go without saying that we really, we need to take dramatic steps to get ourselves in a much better spot to persevere what could be another really dry year. And so I think that the penalty structure, I do think it should be progressive for larger water users to have a greater penalty than those that are at a lower tier, because they are consuming a greater portion of water. I do think we need to look at the irrigation accounts much more carefully, and to look at the variance for golf courses, and to work to find a way to reduce their usage while still allowing them to have, recognize that they're a business. We don't want to put people out of business, but we also need to look at ways to reduce their usage, and irrigating greens, I think, might be the way to get there. I think that we also really need to, I think in addition to this, we really need to look at a prohibition of watering lawns in general. Because at this point we're down to 1 day a week, and most lawns are barely, if they are alive at all, they're barely hanging on anyway. And I do think that at this point we need to ask ourselves, is it even worth the amount of water that anybody is putting on a lawn to keep it marginally alive, given the costs that we are facing, and we are looking at, we'll be talking about later, in order to provide water. And so I really think we need to come back and look at whether moving to a prohibition of watering lawns, what that will do to our water supply projection for the coming year. And I'll end on that point, which is I really think we have to be guided. What we do here has got to be enough to be able to weather through another similar dry year next year. I think that is, I know we have got other projects that we are looking at trying to increase our water supply coming into Marin, that we hope can augment what we have. But I think that we need to be prepared that we may have what we've got, and we will get something this coming year. But if we assume the same dry winter that we've just gone through, I think we can calculate what that will leave us with, and what level of water use restriction, not just penalties, but restriction in water consumption, do we need to go to in order to get ourselves through and not run out. And so I'd like to see some analyses when we come back together that help us to back calculate, what do we need to do? I know we've had a goal of 40% that we have made great progress toward at 30%, but 40% isn't the number that I think we need to be staring at. I think we need to be looking at what is the reduction we need to achieve in order to make it through another dry winter and the following summer until the next rainy season. And that should guide us in what levels of water restrictions we ought to be looking at.
All right, should I wrap up the presentation here?
Do you want to speak to Monty's point, Ben? I thought that's the number that we already had.
Yeah, so at a coming presentation, I believe it's the next one, Paul will be sharing some of those numbers that I think is getting at Monty's question. What would conservation, what would demand reduction need to get to be able to buy us time or get through this coming season? So I think there's some good data there that we'll be diving into. As a start anyway, I'm not sure it'll fully address all the questions. It'll be a good start.
And just a comment about the Meadow Club, from a meeting that Jack and I had with them, they have already achieved more than 40% reduction in water usage. They also have an irrigation system that allows them to adjust every sprinkler, so they can control the flow at every sprinkler head independently, just for information, which probably reflects what Larry was saying earlier about not watering the greens.
They're watering the greens. It's the fairways. Look,
The
very-
fairways, I'm sorry,
Very brown, very, very.
fairways.
Yeah.
So they've already shut all the sprinklers down.
It looks pretty dry.
And they're looking at utilizing reclaimed water to the extent of making their own if they need to.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, Director Bragman and Director Schmidt. The next steps.
Would you like to have public comment, Carrie, now, or you want to wait till you finish?
I think I'll wait until I'm finished. This
Okay.
is my last slide. On
Okay.
September 21st, we can anticipate a public hearing to adopt a prohibition on irrigation, taking input from, recognizing the input that's been provided this evening. And then, of course, staff will continue to develop the drought rates. If there's any additional questions, I'm happy to take them.
I'd like to, this is Mark Hildebrand, that if there's any board members that would like to weigh in on what they will see on September 21st, this is an opportune time to hear from you. Because as we've already pointed out, the penalty amounts is really a policy decision by the board. And so it's not really based on any analysis that we can do on our end, but rather a level of prohibition that the board would like to enact. So whatever feedback or input you'd like to provide now would be very helpful for what we come back with on the 21st.
Well,
I think that's.
Go ahead,
Larry.
No,
I was
I was
gonna
just
say-
gonna-
Go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate, I think, and I think Monty also seconded it, some kind of a progressive penalty. I like 5, 10, 15, just because it's easy, and it just seems like if you're in tier 4, you're already at a point where the economics of your water use are sort of not a major consideration. And we've got to make it a consideration for folks, so the message kind of gets translated into dollars. So I think that kind of a progressive stepped approach would be the most fair.
Thank you.
And I would suggest, Mark, that what you do is go ahead and draft it up the way you guys see it, and then give it to us that way, and we'll make the final decision.
Okay.
Either before or during that meeting, in terms of not the final will be at the meeting, but we'll change the draft if we need to. So the sooner you can get us the draft, the better.
Okay.
Okay, now public comment. Terry?
You're muted.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Terry was.
Oh, I see.
Something's happening to her.
Yeah, it looks
Audio,
like it's going in and out.
Dump your video, Terry.
I think it's some sort of setting for her because it doesn't
I
seem
see hands
like
raised.
she's.
Carrie, do you want to move folks in from who were raised? Do you see them? If you move them in, then
Are you talking to me or Terry?
I'm talking to Terry. She's having problems with her audio, so I'm suggesting that if she sees raised hands, she can move them.
That's a good idea.
For speakers so that we can go ahead and take the public comments. I see, I think 2 hands raised, but
Go ahead and do that, Terry. That'd be fine.
are you able to do that? Okay, I'm gonna promote to panelists if we can move Baron Hamill. You can unmute.
Thank you. This is Baron Hamill in Corte Madera. I need clarification, if you could, please, that if tier 1 users can irrigate their gardens and still stay within tier 1, is that acceptable, or does it mean no irrigation at any tier level? Thank you.
Would you like me to answer that question?
Sure.
Dr. Russell? So the proposal was that during the winter restrictions would allow only for tier 1 water use without a penalty. during the summer timeframe. Tiered 1 and Tier 2 water use would be allowed, and Tiers 3 and 4 would be penalized.
So it's a quantity prohibition. It's not a behavioral. So to answer the question, you could use all the water on your lawn if you wanted to, as long as you stayed within Tier 1.
But we
Well,
still want to make sure
yeah.
that we're complying with the existing prohibitions that are in the
Right.
ordinance. So both
Right.
would overlap, and but we're talking strictly about a amount of water usage in this penalty phase, particularly. But we're not unwinding any of the previously adopted provisions. And I'm going to move Jennifer O'Mara as our next speaker, if I'm successful.
Hi. I was just looking at the numbers quickly, and I think when you say to somebody, yeah, we're going to penalize you, and then we're going to revisit it in 60 days. And again, these people that are in Tier 4 and probably in Tier 3 are not that sensitive to prices, right? So you're going to give them another 60 days without any real enforcement, and the example you used, I mean, that's what was it, $112 a month that was going to be. And if you do it at $15 instead of $5, that's, what, 345-ish a month. I mean, that's nothing for people that are doing, to Larry's point, to people that are in the 4th tier and probably the 3rd tier. And so giving them a 60-day window before they get another warning is it's not really effective. I think that there's, having someone show up at their doorstep after 2 weeks, have them check the meter or something, really, you're here to make an effective change, and 60 days is not going to be an effective change. That was my biggest one. So if you could, address that a little bit, maybe.
That's an interesting comment, Ben. Do we know how much it costs us off the top of your head to read a meter?
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know. I do know that we have a group, of course, a staff of meter readers, ballpark half a dozen, and they all have routes and they're pretty busy. So we don't really have the mechanism to get out on that sort of increased frequency, at least not out of the gate. So that is inherently in this recommendation kind of a problematic aspect to it. But from a legal standpoint, we do have to provide notice. And then from a practical, being able to understand within that 2-month period how much of the bill was in violation, we won't really know that until we have a full bill post the action, which then leads us to this 60-day period.
Yeah.
How about we have a policy that we insist or give a flume device to folks in the penalty box?
Yeah, what we could look at that when we've looked into this a bit of giving everyone a flume or something like that. And I know that's not exactly what you're suggesting at this point. It was felt that we'd have some percent, and it could be significant, that never hook it up, or we'd have a requirement to hook it up that never download the app and actually utilize it. So the model we have now, where we're providing a significant incentive, they have a little money, they're identifying they're interested to use this device, but we could think about something like that for sure.
Well, how about this then? How about we waive the penalty? If they're at the 250 level, we waive the penalty if they get the flume and hook it up, or something like that,
Is
I'm
there any
also
way-
wondering to what to what extent if we're not looking at our entire customer base, but we're looking at the top tiers as going back to Director Russell's comment of, could we be checking our tier 3 and 4 customers on a more frequent basis?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Or the people who have penalties. I think the commenter, the public comment there was quite interesting because, if we, once they have a penalty, maybe we could pick up the read a little more often,
Right,
but whatever that frequency is.
right. You have 200 total accounts right now in tier 4. So that's your baseline before you even looking at a smaller group of people that'll be in penalty. So you might be talking 100 people. I don't know.
Well, wouldn't all those be in penalty under the proposed?
Right, they are now, but right now without, historically, you have 200 accounts that are in tier 4. So that's people that you measured before you even started cutting back. So some of those people have already set their own stuff, right? They've done other things. So you're not, and then you have 700 accounts that are in tier 3. So that's basically looking at a total of like 2% of your accounts completely as far as residential accounts before they started cutting back.
Sure. Anyway, food for thought.
Yeah, we can take a look at it.
Ben, I have a question whether, and this is for Molly too, whether you can monitor those high use accounts, tier 3 and tier 4, and implement the penalty in 30 days rather than waiting for 60 days. In other words, get 1,000 reads on those high use accounts, so we have a baseline and, let them know that they're going to be subject to penalties, within 30 days as opposed to waiting till December 1st.
Yeah, or we put in an AMI on each of those.
Right.
If the numbers are 200, I thought it was a little more than that, more than 200, but if it's only 200, that might be something to think about. Is just, if you're in tier 4, you're going to get AMI.
So Molly, I just don't know whether you can pick out a group like that and sort of start regulating groups.
Well, I mean, I think the thought is, Director Bragman, that, because of the 2-month billing cycle, we were waiting until we knew everyone was in a new billing period.
Yep.
Because we didn't want any part of the previous period to be counted against them before the rule was adopted, right? So
Right.
If we were to have a regular method by which we could check, but I don't know how we hand select a few people to implement the rule without having it be uniform across the board. I think, that would be tricky to try to figure out, and we can think through it further if there is some.
I would just start with the tier 3 and tier 4 users.
Right. Those who had, and sometimes you have 1 or 2 months, people are using in tier 3 and 4, and then maybe the next month or the next month after that, they're not necessarily, and maybe it's consistent, those who are consistently in the higher tiers. But again, I think we want to be consistent and fair in how we're applying the new prohibition. So I wouldn't want to single out some to have the rule start sooner and then delay because we have this 2-month billing cycle for everybody else. I think we could do something specific to those tiers to let them know and certainly take some action, but I don't know about implementing a prohibition specifically for them sooner than everybody else.
Okay, well, maybe it's something we can work on in the next couple of weeks,
I'll give it more thought.
It's tricky, I know it is.
Yes, it all is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, is there another comment?
We have Roger Roberts and Rick Adler. Mr. Roberts?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear.
This is kind of a wonky question for Mark Hildebrand. It's my understanding that the price elasticity for water is not very great. And and that affects what you do on the pricing.
If it's relatively inelastic, then you need to have higher prices in order to get the response you want. Wouldn't that be the case, Mark?
It's a fascinating question, and I agree. It's not very great, and it's also not very well understood, because as you think through what the elasticity would be, you get different answers depending on the level of use and who's using the water and why they're using the water. So it's a very complicated question, and it changes with time depending on whether you're in a drought or whether you're not in a drought, and the messaging, the social messaging and whatnot. But you are right that our impression is that folks who are in tier 4 in particular are probably very inelastic. They already have very high water bills, and they seemingly don't react much to that high tier 4 rate. And so we can only assume that they're not particularly elastic.
That bespeaks support for Larry Bragman's proposal.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
Okay. Next speakers, Rick Adler, then Deli Woodring, please. Mr. Adler?
Muted.
Okay, I'll get back to him. Deli Woodring, please.
Hi, this is Deli Woodring. I'm on the Tiburon Peninsula. When I figure out the math in my head, I am a little bit disturbed, as is the previous speaker, about only 2% of our customers being in tier 3 or 4. I understand from what I've read in different publications that the water district has 191,000 customers, and 2% of that is not very many. And yet I look at the tier 4 and perhaps tier 3 customers as really jeopardizing the rest of us, the thousands of us who are trying to really help and save water. And it just seems like an abuse to me that those people who are using so much water do not have a much, much higher fine that would significantly impress them. I think the current levels that we've talked about are not enough to impress them. Thank you.
Thank you.
No.
Mr. Adler?
Yes, I would like to suggest that it seems to me that the paradigm of response to the drought should be rethought, because this is not a temporary drought. This is the new normal of climate change. The western half of the United States is going to get hotter, drier, and more fire. The eastern half of the United States is going to get hotter, wetter, and drown. And what we need to do is to rethink all these rules that you're making now. They will become the new normal. The drought restrictions will become the new normal. So when you're putting together these rules, I would suggest you think in terms of the long run, that it is going to get hotter, drier, and there's going to be less water. There will be a few rainy years, but just enough to lull everybody into complacency that we don't really have to have a new paradigm. And that new paradigm should also include things like maybe we need to make all the meters, rethink all the meters and have them all Wi-Fi connected so they're read continuously, so we can have really control over running out of water. Things like that. The meter readers could become battery installers, and just every 2 months install a new battery in the Wi-Fi readers. And I would also like to suggest that we spend some considerable mental and financial energy in planning for new sources of water, because as the new climate change continues in the West, we're not going to get any water from anywhere else. We have to produce our own new sources. And the two I would suggest is capture the fog that rolls in over Sausalito, Mill Valley, and the western half of Marin. And we can capture that with stainless steel screens like fences, It captures the bog and drips down into a trough, goes into a pipe to a stainless steel tank, and you have very pure water. Another is to use solar energy to distill bay water, to desalinate bay water using solar energy, which is a simpler, least expensive way to get new water. And now is the time to start planning, and now's the time to start building, because interest rates are almost zero. And if we don't start now, we're going to have to do it very expensively at the last minute when we find out the rains aren't coming back like they used to. And
Yes,
one
sir.
last thing, is there any possibility of getting these slides onto in the presentations onto the website? Because I just
They'll be on the
understand
website.
them and they're gone. And I'd like to study them.
They'll be on the website.
They're already on the website. The next two, Steve Isaacs, then Mimi Willard, please. Go ahead, Mr. Isaacs.
Yes, hello again. I would just like to comment that it occurs to me that these penalties and the charges for these penalties, very quickly calculating them, amount to about 20 to 50% increase on the cost of our water bills on a monthly basis or on a bi-monthly basis. And one of the objections that many have to desalinization is that it is going to cost us more for our water. Well, these penalty rates are exactly that. It's going to cost us more for our water. Whereas building a desalinization plant, if we are willing to go with a new normal, that our rates are going to be higher, a desalinization plant will get us a supply of water and will solve our problem for eternity. And the district's reluctance to plan and budget for a desalinization plant is just a total mystery to me. And it's a total mystery to many, many, many others in the county. And I don't have to tell you the letters to the editor in the IJ of all of the people who are commenting on our water situation. Almost every one of them criticize you highly for not doing anything more on desalinization. So this argument about cost is got to be taken off the table.
Thank you. Ms. Willard?
Yes. The two speakers ago, I think it was Rick Adler, made the point that drought conditions may be the new normal. If that is the case, the emergency rates could potentially go on for a long time. So 2 points here. One would be, if you're going to go for emergency rates, there should be very clear in the resolution a fairly shortish time frame for those. And number two, therefore, if there is the prospect that this is ongoing, it really should properly go ultimately through the Prop 218 process in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Russell, or Vice President Russell, Baron Hamill wants to speak again. I don't know if you would like to have her speak again, sir.
Sure, it's okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Hamill.
Thank you. It's just a very, very quick comment. I just looked at my water bill, and I would like to see the water bill information presented more clearly, that the information be demystified, because there's only one little line that tells me whether I'm in what tier. So it shouldn't be rocket science to be able to figure out where one stands in their water usage when they look at the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
There are no further speakers, sir.
Okay, so you got enough direction, Ben, on what you need from us?
New Director Russell.
Okay. All righty. Item 10, drought
Wait,
update.
maybe before we move on, I think I'd like to ask the drive at this question of like, is there a penalty scale that we ought to be considering that is actually going to be meaningful for tier 3 and 4 customers? I think that we are recognizing that this is a class of users that may not be very price sensitive, but I think that there's maybe that's up to a certain point. And I just think as we are looking at trying to come up with something that effectively gets people's attention, we don't really want to collect the penalty. We want to have the water savings. And so I know, Mark, as you are developing something to bring to us, if we can see more of a range of options for us to consider, that's all I'm asking. So that when you bring us something, I really want us to be prepared to make a decision at our next meeting. And so to the extent that you can bring us a range of things to be able to consider so that we can make a decision, that would be great.
We'll do that, Director Schmidt.
Good.
Okay.
Good suggestion.
Oh, go ahead, Larry. Go ahead.
No, it's a good suggestion. The whole discussion about price elasticity, I think, really kind of expands the whole discussion. So I think it's a real good suggestion.
Well, keep in mind, the way I was taught is little steps for little feet. So let's get something done and then we move from there and see how it works and move forward. I think that's the key here. If we try to make it perfect on the first shot, then I think that's the definition of perfect getting in the way of good.
Yeah.
So item 10, drought update.
Good evening, board directors. Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So tonight we have an update on the drought and all the efforts going into the response to the drought. First off is a picture of Suhui Reservoir from last week, just to give you an idea of one of the reservoirs out in our system and what it's currently looking like.
Look at the bright part, Lucy. At least the fishing is going to get better, huh?
That's a good way to look at it. Tonight, we're going to start with an update on water supply and water use, move into an update on drought activities and outreach, and then end with an update on our conservation efforts.
Thank you.
So starting off tonight with an update on total reservoir storage, just through the beginning of September, we are at 29,000 acre feet. This is about 37% of our total capacity. In average years, we would see our capacity for this time of year around 58,000 acre feet. So this is about 50% of our normal for this time of year. As we've mentioned before, this is a pretty historic drought, and we're seeing a pretty historic response in our reservoirs from very low rainfall over the last 2 years. As I've mentioned before, this is a very low amount of reservoir storage, 29,000 acre feet going into September. And as you can see, the lowest in the last 38 years since we increased the capacity of Kent Reservoir and built Suhui Reservoir and added that to the total reservoir system. So really seeing the impact on our reservoirs going into the late summer, fall months. So an update on water use over the last couple of weeks. We've seen demand stay relatively steady, slowly declining over the past few months. And in August, around 22 million gallons per day, you can see over here. This has resulted in about a 26% weekly reduction in water use. In weeks before that, we were seeing about a 30% decrease. And really what's starting to change is we're moving into the September, October, fall months where we start to see our baseline decrease. And so that's really seeing these peak irrigation months start to close and we move into transitioning into more indoor use slowly over the next few months, and really starting to see it be a bit more challenging to get conservation savings as we move into the fall winter. Since May 1st, we've seen a 21% conservation savings, and that's in comparison to our baseline, the 3-year average of 2018 to 2020. So following up on a few questions regarding potential water savings through next summer in reference to the emergency intertype project, we've looked at, what are the potential for conservation savings, in our expectations. And so given starting in September through July, targeting irrigation savings first and foremost, a 20% conservation savings would get us over that 10-month period around 3,600 acre feet. And if we're able to achieve 40% conservation savings, that doubles it to 7,200 acre feet. Really moving into these late fall, winter months, typically we see less irrigation. So that really, if we move to no irrigation, given historical averages, we'd see, typically around an additional 1,100 acre feet if we were to move to no irrigation. But a lot is unknown with rainfall patterns and what we can expect over the coming months, but wanted to give some rough estimates of what could be expected. And that's largely because much of what we're targeting within this 20 and 40% conservation savings is irrigation. So moving into our projected reservoir storage, this chart has been updated now through September, and you can see most of what has only been updated is really this black line declining now down into September. So as we move into the winter months, 25% down here in the orange, and then bracketed by average rainfall in the green. And then really the impact that conservation, so 40% conservation savings, can have on our reservoir storage, shown in the solid lines just above the 50% of average rainfall. And this is the average. So quite a big difference over a year if we're able to achieve that. So now moving into an update on drought activities and outreach. First, we wanted to give an update on the recycled water fill station. Last board meeting, we had just had a soft opening, and we're moving into our first official opening, and now have been operating for about 3 weeks. And just as a reminder, this recycled water fill station is on Armory Drive near the Civic Center, and it's free to all Marin residents. We're open currently Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And customers can come with their containers between 5 to 300 gallons to fill up with recycled water. So a few stats since we've opened in mid-August for that recycled water fill station. Through the end of last week, we've had over 53,000 gallons picked up over that three-week period. And we've had 150 different customers come. Those 150 customers have made about 600 visits. So we've had a bunch of people come numerous times, come multiple times per week, and have really taken advantage of this opportunity that the district set up. And in the last week, we've really seen quite a pickup, so seeing about 20 to 30 new customers each day that we are open, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And now I'm going to hand it off to Emma Detweiler, our acting public information manager.
Thank you, Lucy. Good evening, everyone. Emma Detweiler, acting communications and public affairs manager. So we're continuing our community engagement and outreach around the drought. We brought to a previous meeting that we were looking for more opportunities to attend outdoor events and reach our customers. And we recently attended both the Strawberry Community Night and the Fairfax Farmers Market. And in just over 3 hours of attending these events, we spoke to nearly 200 people. Our staff was there passing out items from our water saving kits, answering questions about the drought, This image here on the bottom right is kind of some brainstorming that our staff did with visitors to our table here on ways that they can conserve water. We also provide our yard signs and any other promotional materials that are available. We're continuing to look for additional opportunities. We're currently booking dates with both the Mill Valley and the Corte Madera Farmers Market. So you will see us out and about at these events more often. We've also continued to expand our outreach to our watershed visitors. We have utilized the TAM van, which is staffed through our partnership with One TAM. We had the TAM van parked at the Lake Lagunitas parking lot for 18 days. They were promoting water conservation and also providing drought information to any visitors that stopped by the van. We also have had presentations to 9 different summer camp groups that have been participating in activities on the watershed, and that reached more than 180 participants. Next slide, please. We also hosted our second Drought Drive Up event. This was on August 21st. We had about 200 people come through and distributed water saving kits to them. We're continuing to send out items from the kits in the mail to any customer that requests the items. Is the slide still there? It's kind of breaking up for me. Okay, thank you. And we also have had a lot of interest from different groups in terms of distributing our water saving kits. So we've had interest past our Drought Drive Up event with Boy Scouts, HOAs, and also landlords reaching out to distribute the kits to their tenants. Next slide, please. So our second phase of our conservation advertising campaign is now underway. We've expanded a bit our print placements from traditional newspapers to some of our Marin magazines that are available. So you can see here on the left, Marin Living magazine, we have a half-page spread currently in their latest edition. Also something new this time, we have placed posters at the Village Shopping Center. So there are 2, there will be 3, and those will be standing through November. You can see this one here, the water you save saves Marin, and it's posted in front of the Williams-Sonoma store. There's another at the entrance by Nordstrom, and then one right by Macy's and the Apple store. So some pretty high traffic areas. We have 3 different posters in the Village Shopping Center. So in addition to these new outreach efforts, you go back one slide, Lucy, thank you. In addition to kind of these new tactics that you see here, we also have in production bus backs and transit shelter ads. We're currently running a radio PSA on KQED. You may have heard it. We also have created a video PSA, which I will share with you now.
Marin is in a historic drought that requires a historic level of water conservation. Together, we can make a difference. You can start by turning off your irrigation system and watering plants by hand. And don't wash your car, drive it dirty. Turning off the tap while brushing your teeth and taking shorter showers saves water. Skipping a flush saves even more. It all adds up. Let's make history, Marin. Save water today. Every drop counts.
Thank you. So this video is currently posted on our website. It's been promoted across all of our social media channels. We've reached out to the Community Media Center of Marin to have it aired on Marin TV. And we're also working to have the PSA run on streaming services such as Hulu. So that is in the works. And looking ahead, we're going to be putting together a drought webinar series to provide information to our customers and also provide ample time for staff to be available for Q&A. we're going to be seeking out additional monthly super savers that we can feature monthly. So that could be a business, it could be a residential customer, but we're going to be looking for customers that are making exceptional water saving efforts and feature them as super savers. And happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I will hand this over to Carrie Pollard, our water efficiency manager.
Thank you, Emma. Next slide, Lucy. All right. So looking at our drought program participation, so these are the incentives that we're offering and that we're tracking month over month to encourage demand reductions from our customers. Starting with our turf program, we've hit our all-time high of August of 118,000 square feet of turf grass removed, shy of the 400,000 target, but we are continuing to see an increase in that program. And so, you know, for now that is success. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other metrics on the next slide. As far as all the other programs offerings, we do continue to see active participation and fairly reasonable considering the time of year and you know, and the level of participation we've seen in the past. We do look forward to seeing an increase in our gray water and rain barrels program as we move into the fall, and we continue to push that actively and work closely with our local counterparts to promote those programs. You know, in hopes that we do get some rain, we can encourage customers to hold on to that and use it in their landscaping. Next slide. For turf program outreach specifically, we are tracking the average applications per day. And also per week. And so you can see month over month, we are continuing to see an increase there, which is very encouraging. When we look at the applications per week, which is the graph, you can see there's a significant increase between July 12th and July 26th. And so comms staff and water efficiency staff are digging into kind of what occurred during that time frame to encourage that level of response so that we can build on that and learn from that experience. And as it turns out, we had, you know, of course, social media, e-news, and a new flyer that went out. So it really just kind of reiterates this idea of the more times we can touch people with our message, the more opportunity and folks will take advantage of what we're offering. So we'll continue to do that analysis and build on the future marketing campaigns that we institute. Next slide. Our Waterways Patrol program continues. We're out there looking at educating customers and also ensuring compliance with the restrictions that are currently in place. We, in addition to just you know, looking for water waste that staff sees while they're out patrolling, they actually also respond to external reports from the community that come in. We are starting to see a decline in the water waste tags that are being issued, meaning that our staff are seeing a reduction while they're out patrolling over the last month, which you know, can be attributed to, hopefully, folks understanding our restrictions and taking action to comply. Next slide. There's various ways for our customers to contact us on water waste, the three bullet points there: online form, the hotline, and then also just through door tags. You can see that the conservation calls and emails do continue to increase. As I just mentioned, we're seeing fewer water waste on our patrols, but we are seeing an increase still in the number of calls as well. So you can see that the water waste reports are continuing to increase, even though we're seeing fewer tags are being tracked. So that's kind of an interesting thing that that others in the community are noticing and assisting us in those patrols. That's great. And then, of course, our conservation calls and emails do continue to increase month over month, and we're doing our best to actively respond to those customers as they come in. Next slide. Wrap up our drought outreach, kind of some boots on the ground stats. We've finally hit 100% of our restaurants. A total of 307 sites were visited. A handful were not interested, and that's fine. Many are using their own table tents. The high water users survey and focus group continue to move forward. The survey is currently underway. They took a break over the weekend because it's holiday weekend. Apparently people don't like to respond to surveys on holidays. Makes sense. So they'll pick back up later this week, and then it'll build on the focus group following the survey. And finally, we've put together a 2-page document on the landscape restrictions for new connections. We're using that to help educate the municipalities, but also the permit applicants that come into the local jurisdictions counter so that they understand the landscape restrictions that are in place and that they understand the process and what those specific restrictions are. Okay. Looking at next steps, so we will continue to refine and enhance our outreach conservation efforts. You'll hear a presentation up next on operational water supply projects, I believe. And then, of course, ongoing monitoring and reporting of our goals as we move through these dry conditions. If there are any questions, the team would be happy to take them.
Thank you. I think that was an effective update. Public comment?
We have we have 3. Phil Sauter, Roger Roberts, and Rick Edler in that order, please. Mr. Sauter.
Hi, I'm Phil Sauter from Woodacre, and I want to thank you all for your 15-hour day. You really have joined the battle here. I'm from Woodacre, and based on some of the decisions the board has made recently, and in light of the severe drought conditions we're experiencing and the conservation measures we're asking customers to take, I spent some time with the district's recent urban water management plan, and there was one line item called losses that really caught my eye. After converting acre feet to gallons, I found that these water losses were about 900 million gallons a year, but I wasn't able to find out where they're occurring or what's being done to recapture them or how real they are. And someone please give me the hook if this issue has already been addressed by the board. But to provide some context, these losses are equal to 10% of all the water used by district customers, and they're equal to 15% of residential water use, and they're equal to 22% of the water that's used for environmental releases. Even worse, in a severe drought, these losses aren't getting better. They've actually increased by 30% over the last 5 years. They equate to about 2.5 million gallons per day for every day of the year. So cutting these losses would have given us a 35% conservation savings last week instead of 26%. These losses also equate to 120 million cubic feet. And if they're real, cutting these losses would allow us to release an extra 16 cubic feet per second into the creeks for 3 months. And we wouldn't have had to ask the state recently for permission to cut releases and jeopardize the spawning season of an endangered species. As I said, I don't know how real these losses are or where they're occurring or how, but I'd sure like to. Stopping them would make an incredible difference to all the species who rely on this watershed. One thing I do know is that the district has a state-of-the-art SCADA system to track water movement through all its treatment facilities, pipes, and tanks. And tracking down nearly 1 billion gallons in lost water, or at least putting it into geographic pockets for further investigation, should be well within our abilities. I'd like the board, if it hasn't done so already, to ask staff to determine how real these losses are, and if we actually are losing nearly 1 billion gallons a year somehow, somewhere. In light of what we're asking our human customers to do and what we're taking away from our endangered species, a leak that's almost 1 billion gallons, I think, deserves some extra attention. Thanks for your consideration.
Thanks for your thoughts, Phil. We have thrown the book at this issue. Understand that the bulk of the unaccounted for water, in the opinion of most water people, is a difference between large meters and small meters. So it's a little complicated. An error in a large meter, like a 60-inch meter or a 30-inch meter or a 36-inch meter, goes a long ways to throwing the numbers off. So we have put in state-of-the-art listening devices and use them routinely. But if you come across anything that you think we can do that we're not doing, we'll be happy to discuss what we are doing with you. So keep up the good thoughts.
Mr. Roger Roberts, please.
Yes, I haven't noticed any advertising of the need for conserving water at any of our supermarkets. Is that part of the planning for marketing and getting the public to understand the seriousness of the issue?
Not currently, but I appreciate the feedback. That's a great idea. It's something I'll look into.
Mr. Rick Adler?
Yes, I noticed that in the first slide of this section of the empty reservoir, just a few hundred feet from the reservoir in hills surrounding it was fog. And it would have been quite a simple thing to catch the fog with a fog fence, which is just a stainless steel screen, catches the fog and it drips it right down into the reservoir. I would suggest that you do some research on that, contact some companies that manufacture these fog fences and see if they want to set up a test site, see how much water you can actually get from the fog, multiply that by all the fog that comes in from Sausalito to West Marin, and see if it's worthwhile doing. Maybe they'll set up for themselves, pay for it themselves if they think they could get the contract, or maybe we should invest in it as a test to see if it's possible. But look at that first slide of the reservoir and you'll see the fog hanging over the reservoir. It's just rain that hasn't fallen and we can make it fall through the fence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Bill Keene, please. Mr. Keene?
Yes, thank you. My name is Bill Keene. I'm a resident of Fairfax, California. I want to just first start by thanking the board for having this update on drought. I think it's important. I wish more people could see it, honestly. I do also want to mention I submitted a letter to your board yesterday that outlines some of the concerns I have with the recent proposal that I read about in the Marin IJ related to a pipeline across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. Just starting on the pipeline, I think it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get all the approvals that you need in the time frame that you want to hit, which is 6 to 9 months. So I have a lot of concern about investing the amount of money that you're going to invest with a very unlikely possibility of getting that done. I think the cost is going to be higher than what you're thinking. Certainly across the board, we're seeing increased costs and the availability of materials during this pandemic has been suspect as well. And that's driven up prices. And there's also construction delays. This doesn't even get into the environmental permitting and compliance that you're going to need to do. So I just think your assumptions around that are probably pretty low. Your ability to acquire water from a willing seller, I think, is also is something I wonder about as well. You have not identified an actual supplier of that water, and I find it hard to believe you're going to find somebody who's going to sell it at a price that would compete against maybe some of the other options you might have, particularly the conservation that you could achieve if you asked people and actually mandated people to stop watering their lawns. The other points I wanted to make is your cost with this pipeline also is going, assuming you pursue it, is going to eat into your ability to bond. My estimate is probably you've got somewhere between 100 and 150 million in bonding capacity, and you're going to basically use all of that up. What's going to happen when, one, the solution doesn't necessarily work, doesn't provide you the reliability you want, and two, we are facing catastrophic events in the state. It's not unlikely for us to envision an earthquake or a massive wildfire in our area. So there are a couple of solutions I identified in my letter to your board. The first is a near-term solution, and I know about this because I worked for Sonoma Water for 8 years. Actually worked with Kerry Pollard, who's on the call tonight. And I think you should be looking at the possibility of bringing winter water from the Russian River. From my knowledge of that system, winter water is available every single year in the highest drought years. And then so the second option, so I'd love to see you, can I have just a little bit longer?
Actually just finish one sentence and then You can probably speak. I think what you're speaking to actually is to our next item. So if you want to speak then, you're more than welcome to.
All right, well, last sentence is also look at aquifer storage and recovery in the basin, in the Santa Rosa Plain or Petaluma Basin. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers, sir.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on.
Hey, Larry, before you go on, we should have had a chance for board comments on this too. I'd like to take a moment here at the back end. I think a couple of things. These drought presentations, I think, we made them a regular part of our meetings for good reason, because there's so much incredibly important information for us to share with our customers, and we wish that more folks would attend, because I think there is some important information for folks to digest. Some things of note, it is of concern to me that we have not seen an increase in conservation for several months, while we have gotten clearly in a deeper, the drought has, of course, we didn't expect really any substantial rain, but really our messaging, one might wonder whether our messaging has kind of hit a saturation point in some respect, because we're not seeing any increased conservation. We're edging closer to our 40% goal. So I just want to flag that. And I think honestly, maybe our messaging, while good, I'm not a messaging expert by any means. I just wonder whether we are really striking the right tone of urgency, and maybe being a little bit more clear about what our restrictions are, because that might be a way of maybe having a greater impact on people's attention. I want to ask Carrie, can you go back to the water supply slide that shows the projections for the coming year? Sorry to make you put the presentation back up if you'd already shut it down. But yeah, one of the things I'd like to look at is that projection of if we get a 25-year, that's great. That orange line, right where you were, was perfect, actually. There you go. So the dashed blue line is a 50% average rain year, and then if you add 40% savings, that's what you see as the solid blue line. Yeah. And the orange dotted line is if we had a 25% average rain year. And for the benefit of people joining in on the call, that is roughly reflects the water year that we just went through. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that is, it's in the same range. This would be a critically dry year. So this would be runoff that's probably this is around 13,000 acre feet, and we had around 7,000 acre feet in the last year.
Okay. And do you have a sense of what that 25% would look like if we added the 40% conservation savings?
So it would be very similar to what you see here, the difference. So over the next year, you would see, 7,000 through July 1st, and then you'd see about 10,000 through September 1st or so. So through that peak irrigation season.
I think that's an important thing to include. I know it might make the graph a little bit more messy, but I think it's an important one because, for our water supply system, a really important number is sort of the 10,000 acre feet of storage, because we have challenges accessing water below that 10,000. And so I think it kind of highlights the importance that our conservation savings can make in the future year. If we can achieve that it does, by these projections, provide a meaningful outcome that we can stay above that 10,000 acre foot number. So I want to make a suggestion that we add that to our future presentations, because I think in many ways that's an important planning number to look around.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on.
Actually, Vice President Russell, there is one more public comment that we haven't heard from. Is that okay if we can call on him?
Okay.
Steve Isaacs. Good, Mr. Isaacs.
Yes, thank you. And I will be very brief. You were talking about the conservation, Director Schmidt, and I think that one of the reasons why you are not having the kind of results that you would like is because the public just does not agree with the board's approach to our drought. Every person who I have talked to about this issue cannot believe that you are not doing more about desalinization and trying to solve this with conservation and importing water. As others have said, importing the water is a crapshoot. Who knows if we're going to get it? So the question of conservation, I don't think is a matter of the public's willingness to participate. If the board was doing something that was viewed by the public as being in everyone's best interest, meaning desalinization, I think you would get a much better result. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're moving on. Item 12, watershed.
You may have skipped one.
Oh, I skipped one. Okay, I jumped ahead. Item 11 then.
Got everybody excited.
That's the intertie one. Okay, sorry.
We can skip this one if you'd like. Good evening, Paul Sellier, Operations Director and Project Manager for the Emergency Intertie. We have a brief update tonight, and we're going to run through a review of the drought project alternatives. We've heard some comments on some of those already this evening. Before we jump into a brief progress report on sort of the active elements of the project itself. And then we'll take a dive into the schedule drivers or factors that may be influencing the schedule of the project, water supply, procurement of materials, and then take a look at conservation scenarios that might affect when we need a supplemental supply of water, what that timing might be. And then we'll sort of wrap that up with a brief summary before getting into a review of the key milestones. And then we'll have a quick financial overview that Chuck will walk us through before we close out the presentation. So with respect to the drought project alternatives, of course, conservation continues as our top priority, as you've heard this evening, looking at penalties to help improve that. And of course, you know, we've heard a comment this evening regarding Sonoma water and winter water, and we have been working with the staff there to understand if there are any opportunities that we might expect in a dry year. And to date, there really isn't anything significant to report in terms of water that would help us in the short term regarding winter water. We do continue to collaborate with Sonoma on any and all opportunities to address the drought. And another option there with Sonoma is groundwater storage and recovery. And we heard also tonight a speaker mention that. And that is a longer term opportunity. And of course, the quantity and volume that might be available for storage in that aquifer needs to be determined. It really isn't an opportunity for us in the short term. And it's something we've certainly communicated to Sonoma that we're very interested in, and to understand how many others in the partnership group would be interested in participating in that, so that we can determine what sort of water supply that might be for us in a dry year. We had an update this evening on recycled water in the fill station, and we're trying our best to make that more accessible to more of our customers by looking into the truck hauling aspects of recycled water. In terms of the expansion of our system for recycled water, that we know how to do that. We're working on a design for Peacock Gap. And again, that's not a short-term option for us. We've heard a couple comments this evening on desalination, and what we've come to understand so far is that the timing of our need in this drought dictates that this would be a temporary facility that's somewhat capacity limited. Now, an update here is that we have found another plant that would be available to add to the two that Osmoflow had identified. One of their other plants is coming off of lease. and that would bring the capacity for desalination up to about 5.4 million gallons per day. And of course, we continue to work through our backup options, water by rail, truck, and barge, as we continue to refine and understand those a little bit better. And of course, tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about water transfers and the intertie. In terms of our progress report and the active elements in water transfers, we are developing the terms of specific agreements with specific water companies that we have previously talked about, Glenn-Colusa and Yuba in particular, and we've been contacted by another agency that's interested in working out an agreement with us as well. We're also working with our key water agency partners, Contra Costa and East Bay Mud, working through the terms for wheeling, storage, and treatment of water. And the timings indicated here will be when we hope to bring those agreements to the board. Excuse me. In terms of the project itself, the feasibility analysis is approaching completion, and we expect to have that pretty much lined out by the middle, second, third week of September. So it's fairly close in terms of the technical analysis, and it does look like the pipeline would be technically feasible to put it across the bridge. In terms of our CEQA preparation, things are moving along very nicely there, and we don't really expect too many complications there. And I know ESA are helping us work through that. In terms of the design itself, we're probably somewhere in the region of the 10% complete in terms of design. So we dive now into a review of the schedule itself. And the schedule being driven essentially by water supply, I wanted to just take a time out to talk a little bit about what some of those water supply charts are based on. And what you see here is essentially historical inflow and the frequency with which that inflow occurs. And the red line just is a nominal marker for 32,000 acre feet, which represents our demand. And if we receive 32,000 acre feet of runoff, this time next year, we would be right back where we are today with storage levels of 29,000 acre feet going into the fall. So not necessarily somewhere that we want to be, but just to give you an idea that 32,000 acre feet seems to, we exceed that somewhere in the region of 78% of the time. Or another way of thinking about it, 22% of the time we receive that much runoff or less. I bring this chart up not just for the nice red line, but to prompt me to mention something that we haven't brought up before. And it's what I'm going to call the dry weather, the multiple dry year effect. So we know that after one dry year is followed by another, the amount of runoff that we receive from the same amount of rainfall is less than we would normally receive in an average set of conditions. And we're working to understand how to quantify that. But two examples from between 1976 and 77, very similar years in terms of rainfall. One year received about 8,000 acre feet of runoff. The next year, about 4,000 acre feet of runoff. So maybe as much as a 50% difference there. And for 2020 and 2021 water years, again, very similar amounts of rainfall. And we saw about 15,000 acre feet in one year and somewhere around 7,000 acre feet the next. So I only have a 2-year sample for you. It's not definitive by any means, but just to note that as we go through the rest of these charts, understand that the rainfall, if it is a low amount of rainfall next year, that the amount of runoff that we would expect to see may be a little bit different because it's been such a dry period of time for us. Another way to think about it in simple terms is the ground's very dry. It takes more water to saturate it so that you receive runoff. And we've seen this chart. This is our drought project planning chart that sort of started us off driving the schedule here. And it's based on the same level of runoff from 2020 and 2021. and a 20% conservation level was reflected in the gray dashed line. The 40% conservation is shown for comparison here. And we note, as Director Schmidt did a minute ago, that the 10,000 acre foot level, we're sort of calling this uncertainty zone, because we're just not sure what the water quality in the reservoirs will be and how readily accessible that water will be below that level. We've never operated there before. And this chart seems to indicate that in this condition, the same amount of runoff as we got last year, that sometime in the second half of next year, a supplemental supply would be needed. In previous presentations, we've looked at a different way to think about this in terms of, well, how often do these levels of rainfall and runoff occur? So what sort of frequency was 2020-21 runoff? And we can see it represented down here. Last year was in the 2 percentile. So it's not a very common occurrence for us. And so these other lines, 25,000 acre feet is about a 15 percentile, and then the 55,000 acre feet in the 50 percentile range. And these are the corresponding storage level curves that you would see, assuming that we're able to continue along with 20% conservation. So this is another way of thinking about it in terms of how likely it is for another dry year to be foisted upon us. And of course, frequency may not be the best way to do it, but it's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is in terms of conditional probability. We do know that the type of year that we're having in any given year does have some sort of influence on what the next year is. And looking at our data set for 142 years of data, we can see that if we classify the years as follows in the box here on the chart, it's unlikely that you would go from a critically dry year to a wet year, for example. That probability indicates about 6%. And on the other hand, going from a dry or critically dry year to another dry or critically dry year is showing about a 30% chance. So each one of those has a similar chance of occurring, and the normal has about a 35% chance. So very similar probabilities of those three curves occurring. So again, these are just ways to help us think about what future storage levels might be. And ultimately, really, it comes down to a question of acceptable risk. As I'm sure you know, risk can be thought of anyway as the product of consequence times likelihood. And yet when consequences are severe or so extreme, they kind of dominate that equation. So, so thinking about our future water supply in terms of risk. We move then into sort of procurement or critical path items. And one of the items that we know is upcoming and is a fairly big ticket item for the project is the purchase of pipe. We're looking at almost 50,000 feet of pipe. To give you an idea, that's maybe 8 miles or so of pipe, almost as much as we would put in an entire year under normal situations. And as you can see from our project Gantt chart, if we were to order the pipe in October 20th, the first sticks of pipe show up on the job site in that first week of March. So it's a really significant lead time item for us. And it really is, in terms of this project, there is no room for delay in the schedule if July is to remain our target for in-service date. Materials procurement from this time of year, we're allowing about 5 months, reflecting that November and December are obviously holiday periods. We know that there are supply chain issues, transportation and materials for things that we normally would expect to be delivered without trouble. And so it's important that we maximize the amount of time that we have available for procurement of these. And of course, During construction, we've got 4 or 5 months really to construct this. And that translates to about 300 feet of pipe per day if we want to hit our July in-service date. As a project manager, if you're trying to de-risk the delivery of this project, you wouldn't be looking for ways to introduce new delays. That said, I do understand, and we do understand the level of the decision that's in front of the board. And so we wanted to look at strategies for procurement that might allow us to either de-risk it or to at least understand it better. And so one of the strategies that we're looking into is this notion of, is there a potential for a restocking fee? And we need to understand the costs and risks involved with that approach. If there wasn't such a thing as a restocking fee, could we sell the pipe ourselves, either through a broker or directly? And how would this work? And we know that, as I mentioned, November, December is a traditional holiday period. And we're told, and we're looking into the details of, the steel mills and the fabricators, they shut down for a period over this time, some a month and some longer. The other thing is that in terms of pipe fabricators, under normal circumstances, that there really are only 2 outfits on the West Coast that supply pipe. And recently, one of them bought the other. So there's really one pipe fabricator on the West Coast. That said, we have contacted a fabricator in Kansas, who normally delivers sort of east of the Rockies. And because of the quantity of pipe we're looking at, they may be interested in bidding on this as well. The other aspect is, is there a way to de-risk this purchase by waiting until after the rainy season has sort of at least partially occurred, say to the end of January or so? That would represent about a 3-month delay. And so how could we get that 3 months of water supply? And the 3 months that we need for July, September, August, and September, which are some of our highest months, unfortunately. And so even with 20% conservation, we'd be looking for about 8,000 acre feet between now and then. So this is what that would look like if the board were interested to pursue something like that. For these months, you're basically averaging about 35 gallons per capita per day. And these are based on a population of about 200,000. So it's just a sort of a crude estimate, but to give you an idea. And this reflects, you can see the percentage reduction from baseline over on the right column. Now, important to note that assumes that we would get 100% compliance if we were if the board were to move forward with something like this. And that's just not been our experience to date. So there would be some amount less than 100% compliance. What exactly that number would be, I'm not sure, but somewhere around 70% seems like it might be reasonable. And so just shown for illustration here, what that effect would mean if we really wanted to have a little bit of security is that 35 GPCD would really be more like 25 GPCD. And again, if I put my project manager hat back on, there is a risk in this approach that we don't achieve these levels, as we've seen so far this year, working on conservation pretty fervently since February. So this is what it would take, I think, to give us a chance anyway of deferring a decision on procurement. The key milestones, we've checked off the August 30th so that we can complete our feasibility work and any design needed to support CEQA. And then upcoming, we're looking at CEQA on September 21st and authorizing full design at that time. And then between September and November, there'll be discussions on bonding, and we'll be bringing various transfer and wheeling agreements to the board for review. October 19th is the nominal date for pre-purchase of material with a ballpark a cost estimate of about $20 million. And we're looking at awarding construction in February. So wrapping up what I've sort of gone through fairly quickly this evening, the water supply forecast really comes down to sort of a level of acceptable risk. We're going to continue to pursue ways to de-risk that procurement process. And then as we think about how to work to achieve the conservation levels to defer procurement until the end of January, noting that it does add risk and uncertainty to the project. We'll continue to look for more options to de-risk procurement. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Chuck, and he'll walk us through the financial overview.
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, directors.
Before we go there, Paul, let's back up a little bit. Why aren't we out to bid now? What do we got to lose?
Well, the first thing we want to make sure that we complete that feasibility analysis. And then once we have that secured, then we have a couple more boxes to check with Caltrans since they own the bridge. And then, yeah, pretty quickly after the feasibility, within a week or two of the feasibility study, we would potentially be ready, subject to the board's comfort level with that decision.
But wouldn't we be better off if we had the pricing from the bids?
Yeah. As project manager, I would strongly urge the board to think in those terms, but I also understand the difficulty and the magnitude of that decision.
Well, no, but I mean, you can go out to bid. You don't have to award.
True.
I think we just better be careful about waiting and waiting and waiting. I think some real numbers would be helpful, along with commitment to delivery beyond what they talking,
Mm-hmm.
Even if we paid a nominal fee to get them to bid.
Yeah. So we will be, just to elaborate a little further, we do plan to advertise, obviously, prior to October 19th.
Sure.
So we will have results from the bidding process in September, most likely.
Right, but I mean, it's September now.
Yep. Understood.
Okay. Sorry, Chuck.
Oh, no worries. Good evening, directors. We'll walk through just a few slides on what our thoughts are on bond financing right now. So first of all, I want to give you an idea of what the timeline would be like. Right now, we're looking at going out on September 17th to do an RFP for underwriters for the bonds. And then on the 21st, we bring an item to the board, and the board would engage bond counsel and our municipal advisor. And then we'd also bring forward at that meeting a reimbursement resolution so that when we issue the proceeds or when we receive the proceeds of the bond in December, we could reimburse ourselves for any funds that we've used out of reserves to start the project. And then moving into October, we would engage the underwriter. And then in November, at the November 16th meeting, the bond would authorize the board would authorize the sale of the bonds. And then December 2nd is when we actually have the bond sale. And I kind of highlighted that in green there. That's kind of our final trigger point where we've made a commitment to issue the bonds. And then December 15th, we would have closing. Next slide, Paul.
What will be the limits on the usage of the bonds, Chuck?
It depends on how the covenants were written, but usually under the government code, it's for specific capital projects. So in this instance, all we're really contemplating is just this project.
Okay. So if this project didn't go forward, then we'd have to refund the bonds?
No. We would have it written so that we could use it on other projects.
Okay.
But we're sizing it based on what this project is.
No, I understand that. I mean, I know that normally we're pretty restricted on what we can spend it on.
Yeah. We would have to spell out specific capital projects that we would use the money on, use the proceeds on.
Okay.
And Chuck, to be clear, we would have to sell all the bonds at that point in time. We can't sell bonds over time. as we take on debt, so that if we end up getting a really wet year and we no longer need all those funds, we don't have the ability to stop selling bonds. We end up selling all 60 million.
No, you can sell any level we want, Monty. It's just
Over
that
time.
the
We don't.
Yeah.
Can we sell them over time as we incur debt and make decisions?
Yeah, usually you sell them at once, and they're set up in different tranches. So you have some series bonds and some they're term bonds, but usually they're sold at one time, and you have to use the proceeds within a certain time period, usually within 3 years.
But we could sell 30 million and then 30
Right.
million.
Well, what you could do is, if and that's kind of what we did here. We kind of looked at the lower end of the project. What Paul just showed you was 60 million. So if we got into the project and we realized that it was going to be more than that, or that we wanted to add other projects, we could do that at a later time.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we built this model here with our preliminary estimates. We kind of took the low end of the project at $60 million. And I had Sperry Capital, Jim and Martha ran this based on what current market conditions are looking at to see what it would look like. So we assumed we'd get $60 million in proceeds. The true interest cost for the bonds would be about 2.7%. And that's all in. That's all the fixed costs that we have for bond counsel and MA and all those kind of costs, underwriters costs, and then what we'd actually be paying on the bonds. So the way they structured it was with an average coupon of about 4%, term of 30 years. And what that would give us when it's stabilized be about $2.9 million per year in annual debt service. So if you think right now we're paying about, I think, $9.5 million a year in debt service. So we would add that on top of that. If you wanted to fund that totally through additional rates, then we'd look at a rate impact of about 2.8%. And that's based on annual revenues of about $105 million. And what that would do to our debt coverage ratio is bring it to about 1.7. So let me have the next slide there, Paul. So I showed you this slide to show you a couple of things. One would be our capacity. And the other thing is what it would do to our debt coverage ratio. So the 1.5 and the 1.5 and the 1.25 that you see here, 1.5 is what the board's policy is. So we want to keep our coverage ratios at 1.5. The 1.25 is what our existing bond covenants require us to keep those coverage ratios at. So as I said, right now we're about $9.4 million in current debt service. So if we drop that coverage ratio down to 1.5, down to the board policy level, we can incur additional annual debt service of $4.2 million. And that would allow us proceeds now at $84 million versus that $60 million that I just showed you. And then if we came down to the 1.25 debt coverage ratio allowed by our covenants, that would give us additional debt service of $6.9 million per year and give us about $138 million in proceeds. So kind of back to our discussion that Director Schmidt had asked, we could have capacity in future years to issue more bonds and use more proceeds, and those might be for other projects as well. And
what's our
these
current
numbers? Yep.
What's our current DCR?
We're a little bit north of 2 right now, and we projected when we showed you the numbers at the monthly finance committee meeting last month. We showed you that we projected to be at 3 by the end of the year. Now that number will probably change because of the conservation efforts.
Would there be an impact to our bond rating if we hit 1.25?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. Right now we're AA+. I think as long as you are within your covenants, it shouldn't affect those. But as you start to increase your debt expense and your overall expenses, that could possibly have an effect on your bond rating.
Is there a way to understand that better? I think that's a meaningful impact that we should try to have a better understanding about.
Yeah, I think Director Schmidt will have a better, like right now, these numbers are very preliminary. So I think when you will start to really get an understanding of that, is as we get into the November timeframe and where you start getting the rating agencies that are going to look at these bonds and look at us as an agency. And that's when we're going to get an indication of what the impact's going to be to our ratings.
Yeah, it's a bit like maxing out your credit cards, Monty. It has similar effect. And they start paying a whole lot of attention when the DCR starts dropping.
Yeah, I do think right now we have some things that, will also help with our ratings. I mean, we still have, we have a rate stabilization fund that's healthy, and we've got a, what we refer to as our reserve of $22 million, which is healthy. So, those things help. Those help your rating. So, I wouldn't say for sure that our ratings would move lower based on this issuance. And then we're just some potential alternative financings that we're starting to look at, just kind of stretch the surface on. There's the iBank, which is the Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank of California. They provide financing for projects like these. We have the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund that provides low interest loans for these kind of projects. And then we've got with the Water Infrastructure Financing Act that will finance, I think, up to 49% of these, $20 million. So these may not provide a total solution like bonding will, but they may be things that either provide us some sort of financing for, if not this project, for other projects that we may need financing on. And then I think your next presentation information item is on some grants that are being looked at. So these are some alternatives that we have. So that's where we're at right now on the bond financing side of this.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. I don't mean to cut any questions off, but this is the last slide. So I'll just finish on the project itself. The next steps are we're continuing our coordination efforts with key agencies, focusing on completing the feasibility analysis. And then, as I noted, there's some items upcoming for further board consideration. And then we're going to continue working on developing our backup options, including temporary desalination and of course, rail, truck, and barging of water as our other backups. And conservation remains our focus as we refine, improve, and push for greater conservation efforts. And that concludes the presentation this evening.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I do have a question, Paul, on the other options. I don't know if you guys get the solicitations that the board does. You probably do. But I got one for a shipboard desal where they do the desal on a ship and then send it in, put a pipe in. Have you guys seen any of those proposals?
I have seen one from a Norwegian company,
right,
that doesn't actually have a boat yet, but they'll take your money to build one if you'd like.
Okay.
But and then we did sort of look into it 10 years or 15, I guess 15 years or so ago, as an option back then. And the same company, Water Standard, no longer is in that business.
Mm-hmm.
But as we thought about how would we get water off of the ship and into our facilities, it's not impossible. It's just a big challenge trying to figure out how to get a docking facility that we could, get water from a sizable ship onto shore.
That leads me to what my real question was, okay, which is in the headlands west of the Golden Gate Bridge. Do we supply water around the western corner of the headlands to the Navy base there?
Is the Marine Mammal Center?
No, the Marin Headlands. So there, you go through a tunnel.
Yeah.
There's some housing out there. I don't know if it's Coast Guard or Navy or it could be Army for all I know.
Yeah, I think it was all part of the Nike missile battery back in the day. So that area, I think, is served by GGNRA through Fort Baker. They actually receive our water, and they used to anyway, because the Army has a manual that tells you how to treat water and you have to follow it. So anyway, they'd take our water and they would add chlorine to it before sending it through their system. But I think that's Golden Gate recreational.
Yeah, no, and I know this is a little bit, off topic, but, the desal, to me, bay water as a source of desal is pretty problematic, as I think everybody who's kind of looked at it understands. But whether we could get a dock in that corner of the district so that you'd have access to deeper water and, more inflow, outflow, tidal type of environment as a water source. So not to distract you from your busy schedule, but it's just something I've thought of, because this whole using San Rafael Bay or San Pablo Bay as a water source does seem pretty problematic versus actual ocean water, which maybe we could grab in that corner of our district. So that's all. I mean,
okay.
just something to think about.
We'll check that out, see what's there.
Any more questions from the board?
Yeah, a couple of things. In keeping with the comment from an earlier caller, Bill Keene, I don't have a lot of experience with construction of complex projects, but enough that I've never seen projects, something this complicated, come in on schedule. It seems like there's always unexpected delays, and costs as well always seem to be higher than projected. I know we're doing the best that we can to try to estimate these things, but given that we're making significant investments because we want to make sure we have water supply reliability, I'm concerned that even with our best efforts, that this project will take more time than what we're currently predicting, and that costs will also be higher. As such, I think it's really incumbent upon us to come up with alternative scenarios right now, which I don't think we currently really actually have, which is to say, what happens if this project does not come through in time? And how do we buy additional months of water supply, assuming, again, that we have the same kind of dry year that we have gone through? And I think really right now, the only thing that we really have at our fingertips is some level of much higher level of conservation through water use restrictions. And hopefully we don't need it. Hopefully we'll actually get, something of a normal rainfall year coming up. But I think if we don't start planning for an alternative wherein we're not necessarily relying on a intertie project, I think we are putting too many eggs in one basket. So I would like to ask that staff do develop an alternate set of options that do not rely on the intertie project, that basically do leverage the one thing that we can enact, which is much greater restriction on water use in order to get us through next year. And hopefully we don't need that, but I think we need to understand that better, especially when we're looking at projects that a project that is very expensive. It's a lot of money when we have a lot of other financial needs in our district with aging infrastructure and other things. So I think we need to understand that a lot better. And so I hope that the staff can work to develop something for us, because we have some very important decisions coming up really quickly. Question about some of the pipe material. I'm wondering whether this pipe that we'd be acquiring could be used elsewhere in our system. We have a lot of aging pipes that need to be replaced. Is there a chance that if we acquire these pipes, that we can put them to use elsewhere in our system to make upgrades that we need to make?
We certainly could. Now, not all of our pipes are 24-inch, but
yes, we certainly could. And we did check to see if the Pelican Way facility down in San Rafael could store pipe. And the last we checked, we did have a review that it could store up to 5 miles of pipe. And we can check and see if there's room in other locations for any remaining pipe.
Do you, and I don't expect you to have this if you at your fingertips, but do we need that many miles of pipe? In you know, if it were to rain and we did not need to build the project, can we put all that pipe to use somewhere in our system, or what percentage of it? I just think it would help us to have a no regret scenario if we're going to be putting making a $20 million commitment, understanding what that risk is should we end up not needing it would be really helpful to understand.
Yeah, I'd ask for some more time to look and work with Crystal's group to understand which of the pipes might fall in that category, because there are a number of 12 and 14-inch pipes throughout the district that maybe would be good to look at changing the size. Just from a pumping efficiency standpoint, it might help in that respect. And then there are other larger transmission lines that we have that are, of course, several miles between the lakes and the treatment plants. But again, I'd need to check and verify that size was appropriate for those. But there are a few places that I know of off the top of my head that we could certainly use the pipe, but we need to look into that for you.
Okay, that'd just be great to understand. And looking into the restocking fees and our ability to sell these things, a concern I'm obviously highlighting is that we make these financial commitments and then we get a substantial rainfall year wherein it becomes questionable whether to continue to move forward with the expense of the project. I think also another comment is that I really think to the extent that we really can, look to our partners to the north for any options on water that can, again, help buy us some time. If that's all we get for 8,000 acre feet is a lot of water, but if we're able to cobble together between conservation and some sort of water supplies from Sonoma that, again, help buy us some time to see how the rain year shapes up, I think those would be options that would be worth exploring further before we have our next meeting.
Yeah,
those are hot and heavy in discussion, Monty, right now, but we are not getting a lot of warm and fuzzy response from our friends north.
Understandable. I know they're not in great shape. Nobody is right now, but to the extent that we're looking at committing $60 to $90 million for infrastructure, if we're able to secure options, at obviously some cost, but again, it's insurance. Everything we're doing right now is about insurance, about the uncertain water future that we're going to have for this coming winter. So that might be maybe, I'm sure you guys are talking about it, and it'd be good to be further involved in some of those discussions.
Yeah, we've definitely expressed our interest and are 100% in on any water supply that we can get from Sonoma. Absolutely.
Just remember, Monty, we are expanding or reconnecting the Castagna pump station. That's what the Castagna pump station is all about. That's its whole purpose, is to push more water down from Sonoma to us.
And it's also why I just think, the groundwater bank, the option to bank water in future years up north, why that would be really nice to take advantage of that investment that we're making to use that for water supply security and reliability and added storage in future years.
Yeah, just be aware there's water right issues, and getting the water back it's easy in talk. It may not be so easy in reality of, you may not get back 100% of what you put in because it will have been used. The other thing is that Sonoma is in the process right now of activating 3 wells that are currently unused along Petaluma and I guess as far north as Santa Rosa. So they're looking at that, not just looking, they're actually doing it. They're bringing on a well at Todd Road to pump water and alleviate some of the demand from the south with that water. So things are happening on the Sonoma County side. And perhaps, Ben, you know, it might be a good idea to have a presentation on what Sonoma is doing in the not too distant future.
Yeah, well, we could do that, and maybe we could couple it with a discussion in regards to the West Marin agencies as well. So we could kind
Absolutely.
of bring
Absolutely.
a regionalization. Not only are they interested in the letter they wrote to the board for potentially a piece of the water we were to import, there may be some near-term needs. There's a call set up, and I'm interested, once I have that, to brief the board on what near-term needs they may have.
Cool. Okay, public comment?
Yes, I have two so far. Roger Roberts and Bill Keane, please, in that order. Mr. Roberts.
Hello again. I want to go back to water supply forecasting and make a couple of observations. It's my understanding that the years we get more water than we need from winter storms typically are El Nino years. Now, the weather mavens are already saying that it looks like this is going to be a La Nina year this winter. And that's when we do not get the atmospheric rivers that supply us with the water that we receive in El Nino years. And it would, I think, be helpful if there was an analysis relative to water supply forecasting in relation to, if you will, El Nino and La Nina years. And that will help you understand what risk we face going forward, particularly this year with the water, where the weather mavens are already saying it looks like another La Nina year.
We agree completely, Roger.
Well, I would wonder, Paul, I know at a past presentation, you've actually looked into this question, and I believe that what you saw was that it was not deterministic, that we get both we get wet years and dry years, and that it showed no meaningful trend for us. But maybe you can speak to that.
That's generally correct, Director Schmidt, and consistent with what NOAA publishes with respect to the San Francisco Bay Area in terms of La Nina years. We are in sort of a no-fly zone, a neutral zone, if you like, in terms of being able to predict the influence of La Nina. And it on the NOAA website, it will give you percentages of 99 to 104%. And of course, that didn't exactly pan out for us in the last couple of years. Separately, we've looked at a very small data set of what's classified as La Nina years and tried to derive a correlation to rainfall. And it's ever so slightly beneath our 52-inch average, that it would be difficult to say categorically La Nina year means low rainfall year.
Just remember that past performance is no guarantee of future. We're in a fundamentally different situation. We have to be very careful with looking back, because we don't really know what the database is for climate change and its impact on rain. So it's a very complex time. I think we're just going to have to find it out by living it.
Mr. Keane, then Mr. Adler.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. And I apologize for commenting on this item and the last item. I guess I should have read to the bottom of the agenda. I won't repeat what I said last time. I do want to just touch on a couple of things that I didn't get to. But before I do that, I want to echo what Director Schmidt has been talking about in relation to conservation. It's very clear that we are not seeing the kind of conservation that you're hoping for. And this is no reflection on the staff at all, I don't think. But I think this board has to get serious about conservation and mandating it. We're talking about thousands of acre feet that you could produce. That's That's your cheapest source of water going forward in this present next few months. And I would urge this board to look at trying to ramp that up and see if you can compel people to do it. Regarding the two solutions that I talked about earlier, the first one, I didn't quite get to the end of what I wanted to say, but essentially there is winter water. I hear Director Russell talking about that talks are squirrely, squeamish, whatever you want to call it. I'd like to hear more in a public setting. What are those talks? Invite somebody down from Sonoma Water, Grant Davis or one of the board members there. I would like to hear exactly what is holding that up, because I know that water is available and there's capacity in that pipeline. That's a cheaper source than building this pipeline across the bridge. On the longer term solution, just looking at the Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basin, I just update some of the things that were in my letter. There's probably somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 acre feet that you could store on a yearly basis. It isn't a solution for this year. You're correct in that, but it is a solution that you could employ every year. And then when you get to these dry years, you've got banked water. Are you going to get acre foot for acre foot? You know, that depends on how the basin is managed and how that moves forward. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with you, Director Russell, that you're not going to get what you put in. It kind of depends on how it's managed. And then lastly, I know these are hard issues. We are in a serious crisis here. I appreciate all that the staff are doing. General Manager Horenstein, you're in some really tough shoes right now. You're doing a good job. Just, you know, keep being transparent. The ratepayers really need to understand what these other options are and hear about it. Thank you.
Just be aware, Mr. Keene, that I have been pushing on Sonoma Water since 2004 when I was first elected to look hard at ASR, and it has moved very, very slowly.
Mr. Adler?
Yes, I was going to suggest that I see two major flaws in the presentation of intertie water. One is that this new normal, what you call the drought, extends from Mexico to Canada and east to the Rocky Mountains. All the rivers are running dry and low, and all the reservoirs are running empty. And there isn't going to be any water to tie into. If we have another drought, it's going to be a drought everywhere. These dry years are not just here, but everywhere. So second major flaw is that in the bottom of the financial chart, it said subject to current interest rates, that the figures did not include an interest rate change. Well, the interest rates are as low as they can get because the Fed is at zero. It can't go any lower. The interest rates can only go up. So all those financial projections have to include interest rate increase, probably a big interest rate increase if inflation takes off, and which is also subject to political winds, which you just can't understand which way that's going to go. And I would suggest that any investment in these pipelines is a waste of money. We should invest in solar desalination, which is a lot cheaper, more efficient, steady than reverse osmosis desalination, which is what you've studied in the past. But solar distillation uses solar energy, which is very inexpensive, pays for itself in a few years, and you take all the water out, you wind up with salt, which can be sold. You don't have to put it back into the bay. Makes the whole project much simpler, much cheaper, and all more money spent on pipelines would be much better spent on a permanent solar distillation that we can install and maybe fog too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have two more speakers, Baron Hamill, then Deli Woodring. In that order, please. Ms. Hamill?
Yes, thank you again. I've spoken about this in the past, and to Director Schmidt's point about communications needs to be more effective, and more urgent. That the mode needs to be shifted from normal type of communications, the type that's being done now, to what's called crisis communications. It's a completely different approach to reaching the public with a greater sense of urgency. And given that conservation and that mindset towards conservation has to be elevated, you need to be looking at a much more crisis-oriented type of communications program. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Ms. Woodring?
Thank you. I wanted to speak to the same issue regarding conservation. I think the public needs a good shock treatment. Many of us understand the urgency of our current water situation, but many of us do not, and I see it daily. I think optics are very, very important. In other words, our local Tiburon soccer field is bright green. Friends are filling their swimming pools with water. I think that because we're now down to 29,000 acre feet, we can certainly justify a hookup moratorium. And I think I agree with Ms. Hamill that we just really need to have a red alert notice to our public if we want to increase conservation, because many of us are trying, a lot of us are not trying. Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Ms. Jennifer O'Mara, I apologize.
Hi. I have a couple questions just because I'm coming up to speed on some of the things that you're doing. And first of all, thank you guys very much for all the details that you're sharing with everybody and all the good work you're doing. My question is regarding the recycled water. Kind of did a quick pop over to around the web, and it looks like we have 1 million gallons per day that was expanding to 5 million gallons a day for the plant. Is that correct? I don't know where we are in that project. I think we started a couple of years ago. Do we know how much recycled water we're getting?
So I can answer that if you'd like, Director Russell.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, the plant was, the Las Colinas Sanitary District had a recycled water plant that was expanded capacity-wise, paid for by the district. A portion of it was paid for by the district. And the maximum capacity of production is 5.4. The district, in agreement with Las Colinas, has a firm 1.8, as I recall, million gallons per day capacity. So currently our demand for recycled water is in the ballpark of 1 million gallons per day.
So we get 1.8 allocation of that 5.4. Is that what you're saying, or
of treatment capacity? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Novato is hooked into the system. We aren't the only demand.
No, I figured as much. I just wanted to understand it. I don't know how we're using that water, and I don't know if part of that's an alternative for us to pipe it into different neighborhoods and stuff, as opposed to people going with their trucks with big tanks and it's a small thing, I guess. But I was thinking it's $5 million, that 5 million gallons per day, but it actually is 1.4 million gallons per day, which is still non-trivial. I don't know if we actually have plans to pipe it into people's yards and replace our use of clean water for landscaping. The other thing is, we're talking about desalination. Can we actually take that water to one more level of clean and use that 1.4 million gallons a day? Wouldn't it be easier and cheaper than pulling something from the bay?
It's not legal right now. The state has not set the standards for direct potable reuse and will not be done until December of 2023.
So we can't actually take it to another level. Like Orange County cleans up their water and they use it, right?
They inject it in the groundwater.
Okay.
They don't use it directly.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is one more speaker, 8800. Last 4 digits, 8800. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Nancy Okada, just wondering if you're planning on getting the water from some of the banks up in Yuba or Calusa. That water is probably coming from Lake Shasta, and Lake Shasta is dropping fast. How are you actually planning on guaranteeing that once you build this intertie, that the water is going to be there? As well as, once again, why don't we have a moratorium on new water hookups when in fact our water supply is dropping so quickly? To continue to add new water hookups to the district seems to me it's really not fair for the current customers who are doing their best to save water as they can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. Any other board comments?
I think just to follow up on the comment Nancy Okada made, under our urban water plan, when we go below 30,000 acre feet, which we have, there's a provision for the board to consider moratoriums. So I think, maybe obviously we're not going to be talking about it tonight, and we may not be able to talk about it at our next meeting, but under our urban water plan, we need to be talking about it. And, I think this year has been a difficult year because the industry is coming out of COVID, but the season is going to start calming down in October in Marin. And I do think we need to put that on the table, because as low as the new hookups have been this season, as we've had repeated comments, there's some big projects in the pipeline. And it's just, it's something that does need to be put on the table and looked at, if nothing else, to give the public knowledge about how many new customers are out there, and how we're planning for the future. So just to follow up to that last comment.
Thank you. Okay, Ben and I have been in conversation, and we're going to push off item 12, which is a grant update, to a future meeting. So let's go forward with item 13. Unless it can be pushed off too, Ben.
It may be time sensitive. Molly, do you have a feel for this?
I think we can delay as long as it's not too long. I think there is some interest growing given the census data coming in, but Jared Mills is our staff attorney. Jared, do you think 2 more weeks would be acceptable?
Yeah, I think that we could delay this item. We're actually awaiting kind of the finalized census numbers. Those are expected early to mid-October, that we'll have, kind of the refinements for San Quentin. So.
Well, why don't we shoot for the dock then? That'd be a little sooner.
Sure. We can do that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So item 14.
I guess Sean's not here. So I'll take that. This is request to fill an additional watershed ranger. Oh, here he is. Watershed ranger position that would increase our number of rangers from 6 to 7. This is a budgeted position. We haven't brought it given the finances, but we do feel that it's prudent to bring on an additional ranger. We expect over the next few years, we may have a retirement or two, and this helps prepare for that as well. So the recommendation is to bring that position on. It is in the budget. You may recall we had 2 and we had to make some hard choices. So what we do have 1 now funded, budgeted ranger position. Staff's recommending that we proceed and fill.
Any comments from the board?
Let's do it.
Are you looking for us to do something here, Ben? It's a little unclear.
Oh, it's just an approval that we do.
We're adding an
Right.
FTE.
Right. No, I understand that, but I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't really say what the action is here. Beyond authorize the
So
general
the-
manager to recruit and hire.
Yeah, that's the recommendation, Director Russell.
And so what does that take, Molly?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I was,
Well, I think typically we do do a vote for these positions. At some point, I do want to revisit with the board, doing that for all budgeted positions that are vacant, but that has been our longstanding practice.
Yeah,
So
but
I
this
think-
isn't vacant. This is a new position, right? This is a little different.
Right.
That's why
So
I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it's a motion. It's a budgeted position that the board did authorize as part of the budget process.
right, yes, I'm sorry. We did have a prepared as a motion item for approval. We didn't have a resolution, if that was the question.
I was just asking what the format is. What do we actually, as the board, what do we do here?
Make a motion to approve.
Make a motion to, I guess, fill or
Authorize the general
authorize
manager.
a new position. I believe it's in the budget, so we're not talking about a budget appropriation, but authorize.
Okay.
Yes, by motion.
Okay. Any public comment?
Yes, Steve Isaacs. Mr. Isaacs. Go ahead, Mr. Isaacs.
Yeah, this isn't to this particular point. I had no problem with this. But I do want to make an observation as a member of the community who attends these somewhat regularly. We have people from the public who ask questions, including me, and there are no answers that are given to the questions that we are asking. That is frustrating and impolite, frankly. It's almost as though you're saying, well, we hear your question, but we're not going to bother to address it. I think that Mr. Celia was the only one who answered a question that was asked from the public. I would appreciate in the future that when a question is asked, someone has the courtesy to make a note if it's your responsibility and answer the question. Thank you.
Would you address that, Molly? If you're prepared to, or I will if you.
Yes, it's actually not typical for public comment to be a question and answer session. I know that people, the public members of the public have a lot of questions. Sometimes if there's a particular presentation where questions can arise, those are brought up and combined. There can be a response at the end of the public comment period, but it is not a typical situation for public to comment and then to have a question answered. It's also sometimes running afoul of the scope of the agenda item in front of us. So that is.
Which means it's not in compliance with the Brown Act. That's
Correct.
the point. Yeah. That's why we don't answer them, is because if they're not agendized, we really can't go there. Can't legally go there because we haven't told people where we're going first. So that's where the tricky part of answering the questions comes in. It's not rudeness by any means. We would be happy to answer them. We just can't.
Could I make a comment? There's an exception to that. If the question comes up in an agendized item, we certainly have authority to answer questions. And I know, to me, having done this for a number of years, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, Larry Russell, we get a lot of repeated questions, and that's not to say they're not valid questions, but anyway, we can answer questions if they occur on agendized items. If they come up in open time, we're somewhat circumscribed by the Brown Act. We can't open up a new topic with the public, but I will circle back with you, Mr. Isaacs, by email and try to address some of the questions, and we can have a conversation that way too. So I do apologize. I know, and I know everybody's doing their best to answer questions of the public.
I have two more speakers.
Okay.
Ms. Okada and then Larry Minikes. Go ahead, Ms. Okada.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a comment about the hiring of a new ranger is a very good idea. My understanding is you don't have that many rangers up there, and they're very important because they watch for the renegade mountain bikers. They watch for the illegal water diversions by the various pot growers and other people who are hiding up there, as well as the fire concerns. So I hope that you hire someone very good and who can, add a lot to your staff and consider more kind of, boots on the ground to help take care of our watershed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minikes?
Good evening. Regarding the individual before the last speaker, I also want to speak to the Brown Act and to what is going on here. And this is actually a perfect example. Here we are talking about a ranger position, and all of a sudden we're having a side conversation about what can and cannot be addressed, when really the time to do this is as its own information item in that conversation you just had, because only a couple of us who get this late. And as a member of the public, I do not want to hear endless questions being answered when you have a long agenda where I want to learn the information that you're going to present. And then when you start speaking off, as Larry, as you were saying, going off topic, it takes it to left field, just like I'm now. I should only be speaking to the ranger position. So I hope I'm making the point. It's really late, and this could go so much later, and then you lose so much of the public if you're answering every question as you go along. So there's good reasons the Brown Act says what it does, and there's good reasons not to answer all these questions. And I do want to say, on behalf of the board, this board does interact with the public more than almost any board I've ever seen here in Marin County. And that's a benefit, but it can also be a big problem. And so with that, I thank you and good evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Larry.
No further speakers.
I'd move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Vice President Russell.
Aye. Okay, we have one more. Approval to fill engineering support services manager position.
Great, thank you. Director Russell, Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. We have a recent vacancy of the engineering support services manager position due to a retirement. This position's very important for our development services, real property and records management. And so we're asking the board to authorize the general manager to recruit and hire one engineering support services manager.
Questions?
This will not increase our full-time employee count, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And it's Paul Morrison who's retiring. It is
It's important.
They're all hits, but this is a particularly big one.
Yeah, that'll be tough.
That's quite a great job.
Monty, any comment?
Yep.
Public comment?
There are none.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Monty,
Move approval.
second.
Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Vice President Russell.
Aye. Okay, number 16 is future meetings. We're almost at the future.
Yeah, so good evening. We have for Thursday, September 16th, our Watershed Committee meeting at 1:30. We have our Operations Committee meeting September 17th at 9:30. We'll have our next regular Board of Directors meeting September 21st. We'll have our Finance and Administration Committee meeting September 23rd. And then don't forget, please, our board retreat on October 15th. And then also, I'll remind you, October 26th is the Operations Committee meeting. So just letting you know.
Great. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Take care.
have a
See you.
good night.
Have a good evening.